Welcome to You Don't Know Ball. Today we're going to be grading every NFL team's offseason. We did our free agency grades, we did our draft grades, and now we're going to be grading the whole offseason for every single NFL team. If you don't know ball and want to know ball, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, let us know in the comments your highest grade for a team this offseason and your lowest grade. What we did is me and Dobbs each graded the team's offseason, combined them, and we got an average grade. So that's the grade we're going to run with. Starting off in the AFC East with the Buffalo Bills, we have them at a B. Dobbs, I think with the Buffalo Bills offseason, what was a little confusing was obviously they traded Stephon Diggs. They had a lot of draft picks in a draft that is historically not that deep. It was really top heavy this year. But I think my issue with the Bills is I struggle with their direction, and it kind of feels like their wide receiver room is a little bit muddy in terms of like who the top dog is. Hopefully, that's Keon Coleman, but then when you have Chase Claypool, Matt Collins, Curtis Samuel, I mean, even Khalil Shakir, I don't know. I'm very interested to see how this offense works this year.
Yeah, so we're on the same page where, look, the reality situation is this. It's not like it was a bad offseason. It just can't be any higher than a B because in the AFC, you're going to get graded harder. It's the reality situation. Everybody knows the big dog the Chiefs are trying to bring down, especially when you're the Bills and that ghost is still looming over you. What happened in the playoffs a few years ago. We all remember. I don't want to remind Bills fans too much, but they're never going to forget. And that's the thing is when you're competing against essentially the Chiefs and the rest of the AFC, you got to be steadily improving every year. And if you're not, you're falling behind. Which now we're at the point where, yeah, realistically, the Bills feel like, and I'm sure Bills fans would agree, they're in that falling behind territory. For me, I think the biggest issue is, and I'm sure you're very on board with this, when we look at the receiver room, and again, you know how I stand on it. Look, it's not about the specific receivers at the end of the day when you have a very talented quarterback like Josh Allen. If you give him the skill sets he needs across the board, he'll make it work, right? As we saw Tom Brady do all those years, as we've seen Patrick Mahomes doing right now, it's more about the skill set of said receivers, not necessarily the receivers themselves. It's not like losing Stephon was the big issue. The big issue is that you didn't replace him with an alpha route runner who has the full route tree. So now we're with it's a group of guys that all are half route tree, minimal route tree kind of guys, and they all are very single skill set. Now, granted, what I'll say is this. Could Khalil Shakir make a huge jump, and could Keon Coleman become a player that, yeah, we didn't expect him to become and really start to develop that route tree and evolve? Yeah, it's possible. But do we lean towards with what we know about these players already? No, not necessarily. And Khalil would have to make a really big jump, and Keon Coleman would have to develop a whole route tree that he still is missing like half of in one season. Again, it's all possible, but realistically, these are a lot of guys that all have very similar skill sets. Granted that they're not the same size players, but it's very similar skill sets across the board. He doesn't have his alpha dog, who's the route runner anymore like Stephon, and they didn't replace him. And the reality of the situation is this offense, it just feels like it needed more juice even with Stephon. And then you lost Stephon, didn't replace him to the standard. You added Ray Davis, which is a nice compliment to James Cook. And it's not, but you'll agree too, it's not just about the offense. The defense substantially lost a lot of really important guys where you got to say to yourself, do you feel like the replacements are up to standard? And, in my opinion, no, it's like they didn't really replace them with guys that are above the standard. They might have replaced them with similar players, but not. They didn't make any upgrades that were quintessential, and they definitely made, a couple decisions where it led to guys that were big parts of these teams leaving over the next couple, and that's where we're kind of headed with the Bills, it looks like.
Well, the Bills defense has been very good over the last couple of years, but the Bills always felt like an offensive team where I think that has to do with the fact that Josh Allen is just so good and so electric, and their offense has always been so good where it's like, no matter how much you're down by, like Josh Allen can wheel you back in the game. So obviously the focus on offense is, probably a little bit overstated in terms of like, oh, did they get ahead with their team in the AFC? And, I think this may be more of a down year for the Bills. And I don't necessarily think that's the worst thing in the world for them. I think sometimes you have to take a step back in order to go forward. And obviously what they were trying to run with these last couple of years just wasn't working. And kind of one of the last things I want to say on the Bills, and I don't want to say it in the sense of like skill set or route tree, but their wide receiver room reminds me a lot of the Jaguars, where it's like you got a lot of like decent guys in there, but you don't have like that number one alpha guy. And like hopefully Brian Thomas Jr. can be that for the Jags, and we'll get to that then. But as hopefully Keon Coleman can be that for the Bills, but obviously like there is like a talent difference in what Keon Coleman and Brian Thomas Jr. are, and the Bills, I just struggle to see Keon being forced into that wide receiver one role right away. And they said that he was going to play X receiver. And don't get me wrong, like I love Keon. Like I've really liked Keon ever since the the draft process, even before his last year at Florida State. But it's just going to be a new look Bills this year, and something that I don't think a lot of people. I don't know. Like I don't think a lot of people can really put a pin in what exactly it's going to look like.
Yeah, no, and also just and to finish off, because you made a great point, I almost forgot, like with Keon playing X this year. So we already have the prerequisite that Keon is going to be essentially facing off against most teams, keyword most, but most teams' best corner every single week. And on top of that, he was the one guy that we were saying, along with a few other guys, that he really struggled against getting separation last year. Like he's fantastic at the catch point. He has a lot of great tools, but as far as separating goes, he wasn't separating very well. And that's going to be something where that transition right away to having to go against the team's best corners, it would have been so much more convenient for him to grow in that slot role where you get to face off against a lot more slots and a lot more safeties, getting used to, getting acclimated. It's going to be definitely a very kind of tough adjustment, I would say, for him. However, if he makes that adjustment, well, then we can essentially put to bed all of my takes from the pre-draft process. We'll see. We'll see if Keon can, really prove a lot of people wrong, but it'll be interesting to pay attention to.
Now, I don't want to discount Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid. Obviously, those guys are good, but at the end of the day, like Keon Coleman would have been a great complement to a Stephon Diggs and a Dalton Kincaid. Like that, I understand that probably the locker room stuff was getting out of hand with Stephon in terms of you just can't keep him around. He's probably causing internal problems. And we talked about it last year when there was that training camp issue. Like we're like, this is getting too much. And a lot of Bills fans were like, no, it's just Stephon. But it's like, we've heard about these things for the last 2 years. Like something is going to give. And especially with the way the Bills season ended last year, it's just like, there's no way he's not out of there. So
no, the writing was on the wall for, I would say, multiple seasons at this point.
So the Bills, we have them rounded out at a B. Miami Dolphins, we also have them at a B. Dobbs, how are you feeling about their offseason in total?
So I would say about the Dolphins, look, my thing was, I like a lot of the moves that they made. And I think it's kind of just also, though, similar as you could say to a lot of, like, a B is in the AFC is a good grade, right? Like it's to get an A or even a B plus in the AFC, you have to do a lot of things. Like, look, the reality of the situation is I might not be the biggest fan of a few contracts, which is probably why I would say more than anything that I maybe gave them a little bit less of a high grade. Where I'm surprised they let Van Ginkel go after how he was playing for them. I'm surprised that they spent money on OBJ, given that you just drafted Malik Washington, who I thought was going to fit that role perfectly, that you're going to have OBJ playing now. I understand logic, though. Give Malik some time to get acclimated. Like, I'm not fully against it. It's just you gave Odell a good chunk of money, too. And, look, as far as the O-line goes, I'm fine with the replacements. But they might not end up being that same caliber that they had from before. And if they're not, we already saw how it is with Tua, where you got to have his guys around him. The O-line could potentially be definitely a lot more of an issue this year. What they did on defense, I'm going to say, I'm a fan of most things. Like I think adding Jordan Brooks to the defense was a huge W. Adding Kendall Fuller is going to be a huge W. Like there are definitely some things you look at across the board, and they made some good moves. It's just, we're also on the assumption that they're going to re-sign Tua sooner than later. But I'm going to say this, as I'm sure you are. I don't necessarily know how to feel about it. Like, it's like, if you're the Dolphins, you're pretty much in a position where you kind of have to at this point. But then on the same side of the thing, but that's what makes it so tough about the modern NFL. And when there's a guy like a Tom Brady or a Patrick Mahomes in the landscape, is that it's like, it makes it so much harder when you're not like the guy, where it's like, it's nothing against Tua. I just don't know what's going to go, but I feel like logically we're going to end up in a situation where they overpay him a lot and then they're going to be fucked on cap. And we've seen the story go over 70 plus times. It's like, you know what I mean, bro?
Yeah, I mean, Dobbs, like that is kind of the overarching story of the Dolphins here is usually when a team has their guy, they extend them as early as they can. And I think this is an indictment on how they feel about Tua because if you look at it, they haven't extended him yet. And he has the weapons. Yes, he may not have the greatest O line in the world, but they went out and got him Teron Armstead, regardless if he is injured like some of the time. They re signed Austin Jackson. Obviously, they felt comfortable enough to give him a 3-year extension. They bring in Aaron Brewer, who is a decent center. I do think that they could have probably maybe went and got a Christian Haynes instead of taking a Patrick Paul. I think that interior should have been addressed a little bit more. They signed Robert Jones and Isaiah Wynn, but none of the Jack Driscoll, none of those guys are moving the needle for me. And we saw what McDaniel did last year. He completely tailored that offense to Tua's strengths. They eliminated the weaknesses of the O-line by getting the ball out so quick. But the issue is you have OBJ, you have Jalen Waddle, you have Tyreek Hill, and then you get stomped out in a playoff game. Like, my thing is, what do you do, right? Obviously, they moved on from Vic Fangio. He is now with the Eagles. But as a Dolphins fan, I don't know how you're optimistic going into the season because to me, I know there was injuries last year, but you're essentially running the same shit back.
Well, and let's include this because this is something I don't know how I almost forgot to mention, but I'm glad you made me remember. This is the biggest thing for me too. I think the Dolphins fans have to consider when I always, because I think of things very schematically, very, a team wants to run things a certain way, right? When you're losing Christian Wilkins, who was one of the biggest parts of your defense, and then now you're essentially going to be replacing him with Neville Gallimore. Look, it's nothing against Neville Gallimore. It's just that's a big turnover at basically the guy who was eating up double and triple teams consistently. All of a sudden, is everybody on the outside going to be able to be as productive? Is Bradley Chubb going to be able to dominate at that same rate we saw him when he was healthy last year, right? Is Jalen Phillips going to be able to play at that same rate? Those are all questions that we're going to have to see answered now because Christian Wilkins, more than anything, we're going to really see if that Raiders contract is worth it or not. I guess is the best way I could put it for every side.
And while I guess I do like the Jalen Wright pick, it just feels like Devin Achane, Jalen Wright, Raheem Mostert, like they have guys there. But I don't know. This is another team to me where it just feels like, yes, they didn't necessarily have a bad offseason, but in an NFL landscape and the way it is, did you really take the swings that you needed to get ahead? But also, if you want to spin it like this before we move on to the Pats, maybe they don't think Tua is the guy and they're not trying to take their home run swings right now. Maybe they are looking at the future at quarterback and are saying, let's not screw ourselves with long-term bad contracts. Let's not try to, I don't know. I don't know.
It would make plenty of sense with the fact that, like, as we've said too, like they have so many guys they're going to have to re-sign soon that have been key parts of the team. We've been ahead of the game. I think history will look back on us as we were ahead of the game on this one. Dolphins fans, you guys don't if you don't end up getting something done with Tua, just don't be too surprised. But along with that, I just want to say don't be too upset because the reality situation is if you re-sign Tua, you're going to lose a lot of these guys that y'all have come to love too. It's kind of like pick one. Do you want the core of this Dolphins team or do you want Tua? That's a question I'm going to leave Dolphins fans on to think about.
Man, Michael Penix would have been so interesting in this offense. But at the same time, I mean, you're kind of getting, you have a stronger arm, but you're getting similar things that you already have with Tua. I don't know. I don't know what the Dolphins do at this point. Moving in to the New England Patriots, we have a B-. So I don't know. I think I honestly would have given them a lesser grade if for the fact that they didn't take Drake May. I think Drake May was QB2 for me in this class. And I don't necessarily love the situation that he's being put in. Now, I'm really hoping they sit him for a full year. I maybe play him week 15, 16, 17, after he's gotten a little bit adapted to the league. My fear is that Robert Kraft is going to want to win, and they're going to put him out there, and in reality, it's just going to screw him up. Because after watching what the Patriots, if you want to call it offense, was last year, it was putrid. Like, I didn't want to watch it. It was gross. I remember watching Mac Jones when he was in London, and it was just one of the most, like, I could not believe it. I could not believe how bad it was. They take Jalen Polk pretty early. They get Javon Baker, who I really like, and I think, I am surprised they got him that late. And I really do like Jaheim Bell. I do think their reaches at O-line was, I don't know. The Patriots tend to always reach at O-line, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. I didn't love their offseason additions. I don't know. The Patriots are just, you re-signed Christian Barmore, good, but this is not an ideal situation for a quarterback, and maybe they're going to try to take a swing last year. I think that since the fact that they struck out on Calvin Ridley, they struck out on getting like a receiver high, and they struck out on getting a deal done with Debo or Ayuk, is kind of rough. And another thing that I want to put, and then I'll let you go, Dobbs. I don't know if you saw, but the Patriots are interviewing GMs for the position. Why the fuck would you let Elliott Wolf draft and then interview GMs? Why would you do that? Why would you interview a GM to an already drafted team? That just made no sense to me.
Yeah, no, it definitely doesn't make a lot of sense. And I'll say, okay, I'll give you, because you touched on a lot of things. I'll just touch on the few things that you did, because you nailed most of it. What I'm going to say is there was a few things too on top of the things you said that confused me a little bit. And here's the first one. Look, the year prior to this, right, Kyle Duggar had a really good season. However, this last year, especially on tape, Kyle Duggar, relatively shaky, right? Not the same player he was the year before. And then you went and gave him a really big sum of money on, I think it's like a 2 or 3 year deal. So, and then again, the way the Patriots have always operated, just confused on that, because that's going to take a very solid chunk out of your salary cap. Move that I liked, credit where it's due. I liked the Christian Barmore re-signing, pretty much the cog of this defense at this point. I like the fact that you got a deal done with Christian Barmore. But more than anything, how about this? The Caden Wallace, right, where they drafted Caden Wallace in the 3rd round. You're not, as far as right now as the depth chart goes, the official Patriots depth chart, he's not even playing left tackle, which is where you would have assumed they would need help, because you have Mike Onwenu as your starting right tackle who just got the fat extension. So essentially, as of right now, they drafted Caden Wallace to back up Mike Onwenu. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me in terms of how they spent that capital.
I think Mike, and I could be wrong, I think they are going to have him play guard.
See, I could get it too, but here's where it doesn't make any sense though then, is you'll agree with me on this, is look, Cole Strange was your first round pick a couple years ago, and you're not going to give up on Cole Strange yet. He's been playing solid enough. He's been playing solid enough. And then City So, what round did they draft City last year? Let me get a quick reminder for myself. 4th round pick last year. City So finished 27th out of 79 guards in the league, which for your rookie year is definitely nothing shabby. So it's like, that's really the question that we're at now, is where is the capital for this O-line going, where you didn't overspend the capital, and how is it going to make sense? Right? You just signed Chukwuma. Like, I don't really understand, I guess, the allocation of the resources for the line. I get that you're looking out, I guess, maybe depth, like just having good depth across the board. I mean, yeah, the reality of the situation is, though, to keep it as short as possible from my end, because you covered on most things. Look, if they don't force Drake May into the fire, it was a relatively solid offseason. If they force Drake May into the fire, this offseason was just as bad as a lot of other ones recently, and it's probably not going to help the team out much at all, if any, long term.
Yeah, so don't quote me on the Mike Onwenu thing. I swear I saw that, and then maybe I'm thinking of the Jordan Morgan for the Packers. I think they're talking about playing him at guard. That's just what I've been hearing from fans, but I don't know. I know they moved him around.
Are never official until it's never official till camp actually happens, and then actually, you know what I mean? It's kind of just more than anything, just an initial assumption.
Yeah. So Dobbs, before we move over to the Jets and finish out the AFC East, What do you think about this? So I heard that Elliot Wolf, the de facto GM, I think that's the right word for it, wanted to trade the pick because the offers were substantial. And Kraft was the one that wanted to draft May. Would you have drafted May or would you have traded the pick?
It's actually just hilarious. Like, I think we have seen over the course of history what happens. It's funny, just all the writing of how the Patriots' downfall has happened is so clearly on the wall for everybody that's been paying real
Yeah.
attention. Like,
You want to know who
if you're
hasn't
the
seen it?
just this is just
The
my
the Patriots fans because they've been so jaded with quarterback play and winning over the last 20 years. They're like the only
no,
people that
it's
have
like
not seen this.
no, literally, and again, I think you would agree on this. Whenever ownership starts to not trust the people that they hired to make the decisions, everything goes to shit. Nobody trusts each other. Nobody respects each other. It becomes an internal war for power. When in reality, as we know, the owner, if you hire the right guys, that's when you take the step back and you say, you guys know the football. I cut the checks. But now that Kraft is, I don't know, stepping out of his role a little bit, you could say, I just don't see it boding well for the Patriots long term at all. And that's exactly what a lot of Patriots fans, I know Patriots fans are echoing the same sentiment as me. So it'll be very interesting to see how this goes. I wish y'all the best of luck, Patriots fans, because it's looking dire. Like it's looking like Drake May, like Hunter's saying, is going to get forced in there by week 4 this year. And it's just pray that doesn't happen.
Moving on to the New York Jets, we have an A minus Dobbs. How are you feeling about their offseason?
I think we could agree, you know what, the Jets, as for as many wrongs as there were last year, they wrote a lot of them, they wrote a lot of them this upcoming season. For starters, I think I'll start with something minor, but something worth noting. You remember when they signed Chuck Clark last year and he tore his, I believe it was either the ACL or the meniscus in the OTAs. All right, you
I'm not
finally
laughing
get the
because of the
safety that you
injury. It's
signed.
just like, what the fuck? Like, it's just, of course it happened.
Yeah, like so you're finally going to get to see Chuck Clark play in a Jets uniform, which should be nice. Okay. And then I think you could say you feel really good about the DB depth on this team, right? Like if we're at a point where we can say we're the most worried about Tony Adams, who again is coming off of a relatively solid season last year. He's the guy you're most concerned about per se, but he didn't play bad ball or anything for you last year, so it's not like anything to be too worried about. The linebacker core, rock solid, if not one of the best, if not the best linebacker core in the league, right? Like this defense is really gelling. You added Javon Kinlaw, who really might be able to make a big jump back with Robert Saleh. You never know, right? Like that's something also you have to monitor. So as far as the defense goes, we're right there. And then with the offensive line, still not the greatest in the world, but you added 2 guys that you can feel very confident in on the outside to keep Rodgers healthy, which was definitely the big Jets fans' number one wish list, I think, this year we could all agree on. When you added Morgan Moses, you added Tyron Smith, that's amazing. I think the things that I didn't like that kind of pushed them away from being in the A range for me personally was just me. Look, I'm not a big fan of the Mike Williams. I think for a team that already has been dealing with so many injury issues, Mike Williams to me is the kind of guy where you're lucky to get 10, 11 games out of him in a season. And I don't know if that's exactly the type of situation you want to be in, where essentially your only other guy who can get off the line on press and has a full route tree is Garrett Wilson, who is an amazing receiver, but still relatively young with not much rapport with Aaron Rodgers. It's just to me, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the way that they built the receiving core. Malachi Corley, I like him. I don't know if I like the situation he fell to as much. I really don't. I think I would have really liked to see him fall to a situation where more like the Niners or where he'd have a very designated slot role. So I don't know how I feel about him on the Jets. But again, he could prove me totally wrong and make it work totally fine. But other than that, right, they did a lot of things that they had to do. And all in all, I think we could say it was a very impressive offseason in terms of how much that they had to fix.
Kind of to echo just kind of what you said, the fact that they just rebuilt the line and added depth and then also looked towards the future in the draft while taking Olu and not going with a Brock Bowers, I think says a lot about, okay, after the way they've handled this draft, I don't believe that barring a disastrous season that Saleh or Douglas are even close to the hot seat. And obviously, an offseason move that I love was the Hassan Reddick trade, getting him for, what was it, a 2026 third. Like, that defensive line is already stacked, and you're just adding more and more. The Jets really do need to compete for an AFC championship this year. And if they don't, it's almost kind of like, I don't like kind of a failed project, because realistically, Rodgers says what, this year, next year, maybe a year after that, and who knows if he's with the Jets after those 2 years. So overall, I did like. So I will play devil's advocate with you on the Mike Williams pick. I think in terms of the quality of receiver that they could have gotten in free agency, he was probably the highest that they were going to get at the position for what they could pay and what they offered. Obviously, he basically got the OBJ deal. And in terms of, would you rather have OBJ on your team at this point or Mike Williams? I'm taking Mike Williams any day to pair with Garrett Wilson. And then you have Breece Hall, you have Malachi Corley, and then, I mean, what, Lazard is your 3. I think that they did what they could in terms of offense this year. Would I have liked to see them go and get a higher guy? I mean, like, the rumor is that they were super in on Odunze if he was there at 10. So that is a reality that could have happened. But I will agree with you in the most part in saying that the Jets did have a very, very solid offseason, and in my opinion, the best out of the AFC East teams.
No, yeah, I think the bottom line is this, as it was last year, but as we saw, it very much hinges on the health of this whole line, especially and Aaron Rodgers, right? That's the thing. But if that core can stay healthy, this is a roster the Jets have built that can compete for a Super Bowl. That is objectively a fact at this point. Now, it's just a matter of them being able to stay healthy. That's where the questions come in, right? But if they can stay healthy, truly, you would find you would be hard pressed to build a really, a more stacked out roster with the salary cap. I mean, they really have filled out really, really well. It's just about health now. It's about Aaron Rodgers. It's about him being able to stay healthy. That's really the bottom line.
I do really like the Jordan Travis pick, actually. I think that was actually a really good pick for them.
No, that's well, on top of it too. You got to think about the future a little bit, even though again, I know what is Jordan Travis's ceiling, I don't know. But at least behind Aaron Rodgers, you're definitely getting to be able to probably maximize that ceiling.
100%. Moving on to the AFC East, not the AFC East. We just did that. Moving on to the NFC East. We have the Dallas Cowboys with a C. Just a lackluster offseason. I know you got to repay your guys, but it's almost like I like their draft a lot more than their free agency period. And I think their draft brought their grade up to a C because I do like moving back for Tyler Guyton. Do I think they probably could have gotten Graham Barton and been a little bit happier? Yes, I do like the capital that they got. Marshawn Nealon, Cooper Beebe, Mars Lafu, like all good picks. And I think they had a very solid draft. But with the Dak Prescott extension coming up, I don't necessarily know what the move is here. And it was so funny because, Zeke Elliott re-signed, and like those accounts that just post like just bullshit in the offseason to try to get clicks because there's nothing going on.
NFL shit posts.
Yeah, something like that. And they had Zeke highlights, and it was still when Washington was the Redskins. It was still, they were showing highlights when Zeke was playing them. But it's just like, it just goes to show, like, I mean, they really have done almost nothing this offseason.
No, yeah. I mean, dude, that's the thing is I think we have to start with the context. The context that makes it so dire is when Jerry Jones decided to verbalize that he was going all in. Like, when, again, Jerry Jones has had so many years to say that, and he never did. And he chose now to say it. And now, of all times, they have seemed and have been less aggressive than they've ever been, essentially, in his tenure. Really odd timing as far as that's concerned, right? But look, there's still a well-built roster, but it's kind of similar to what we were saying about about a few other teams earlier, like the Bills. It's like, look, when you're one of the head honchos of your conference and you're fighting for the Lombardi, it's your due diligence and your duty to find ways to improve every year. I think we can agree, the Cowboys generally probably regressed after this last season. And it's like when you're like you're saying, when you're gonna have to pay Dak, and here's my thing too. Look, if Guyton ends up being the guy that we know he could be, then yeah, the draft, all that, we're gonna look back and say it makes a lot. But on the other hand, if Guyton doesn't develop and he stays that same raw, not as well moving, right, and he's just that same tackle he was in college, all of a sudden, this Cowboys team is going to lose a lot of luster quick, especially when you got to pay Dak. You got to pay a lot of big names coming up soon. I mean, Zach Martin's getting older. Like, there's a lot of things that you're going to have to address sooner than later. And yeah, like, it's just, I don't know if they're in the best position as far as anything's concerned. Now we're in a situation too, minus Stephon Diggs, minus Deron Bland. Your third corner, your cornerback depth is not looking good. Like, they're not in the greatest situation, and especially compared to last year, it's like things are starting to, I don't want to say unravel, but you're losing some of the glue that you had holding the team together. And I don't know, to your point or anything, I don't know what direction they're going to go from here with that Dak re-signing.
But bro, they signed Eric Kendricks. They're fine. It's just like that. That's the. Oh, I just flipped my laptop. But the reality is, like, okay, you got to re-sign CeeDee Lamb. You got to re-sign Micah Parsons. You either have to give Dak an extension, draft a quarterback, trade for a quarterback, or run the Trey Lance experiment. And we've seen over and over again that this team, loaded a little bit more loaded last year, couldn't get it done. So, I mean, they'll never do it, but I almost feel like they just need to hit the reset button at this point.
Well, I was gonna say, it's a great point you just made there too. Remind me here, bro. I'm blanking. What was the draft capital that they gave up to get Trey Lance?
It was a fourth, I think. I think it was just a fourth.
Which for what the Cowboys are now lacking is actually relatively very solid capital. On top of that, I want to add, look, Trey Lance is still third on this team's depth chart. Like, that's not a good sign. If you're a Cowboys fan, that's not what you want to see. You don't want to see that Cooper Rush is still outperforming Trey every day when they're out there. Like, that's the last thing you want to see.
So I do like Mike McCarthy. Like, I don't think he's a horrible coach. I don't necessarily think he was the guy to develop Trey Lance. I just don't. So my thing is, you just spent a fourth on him. Like, what was the point?
That's what I'm saying. Because we're at a point now, realistically, where the writing's on the wall. They're very likely gonna extend Dak. So you spent a fourth round pick that you could have replaced one of the guys you just lost this year with. It was a terrible investment. Let's call it what it was, right? I mean,
Jerry Jones is flipping fucking perks in his insurers in the morning.
He is. That's what I'm saying. Jerry, something's not right. Something has Jerry blanking every morning or something nowadays, bro. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it was they poured too many shots in the draft room. If I don't know if you were peeping, they were pouring the shot. I don't know what's going on, man. Jerry Jones is just starting to let loose a little bit, and Cowboys fans are starting to feel it because Jerry's just not locked in. They need Jerry to lock in. Jerry, you got to re-lock in for him, man. For the Cowboys Nation.
Yeah, Cowboys fans in the comments, let us know, is it perks or age that's fucking up Jerry Jones? Let's move in to the New York Giants because there's really not much else to talk about with the Cowboys. We gave them a C as well. So I do like that they reinforced the offensive line. Jermaine Elmanor, not bad. I do like that they went and got Brian Burns. Obviously, they didn't really have to give up much for his caliber of player, second and a fifth. I think they got fair value for him. And you have Thibodeau, you have Brian Burns, you have Dexter Lawrence, and then why am I blanking on somebody else? There's another person on that line.
You just Kayvon or Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence.
There's one more player, right? There's like a big player. But
no, I don't think for the Giants.
Okay, never mind then. Anyway,
you said you I think you covered everyone.
Okay. Maybe I'm blanking. But anyway, what outside of this defensive line, does this team have? I love the Tyler Nubin pick after losing Xavier McKinney to the Packers. I love the Malik Neighbors pick, but I do honestly believe that if Joe Alt was there at 6, they would have taken Alt. I do think that they were probably targeting an offensive lineman. I do like the Tyrone Tracy pick, Theo Johnson, especially with the idea that Darren Waller's probably not coming back and Devin Singletary is your number 1 back. I'm not trying to hate on dude, but I am kind of a hater of Devin Singletary. I just don't understand. He had one good year in Houston. Andrew Phillips, not a bad pick. But basically, all this to say, Drew Lock is probably going to be the starting quarterback. I don't know if that's true, but it just feels like that's the way it's headed because I don't know how much this regime can stomach Daniel Jones going forward. Like, he is obviously not the future, and this is kind of what we talked about last year, Dobbs. I remember we talked about the Giants, how they had that year, they made the playoffs, Daniel Jones won a playoff game, and then the next season we were like, yeah, I mean, they may be a little bit better, but their record will probably be the same or worse. And that's kind of what it feels like this year. Their record will probably be the same, maybe win a game or two better, but nothing moves the needle. I love Malik Neighbors, obviously gives them a type of player that they have not had in a long time. Let's not overlook that. But he doesn't look all that thrilled to be there.
Now, I was gonna say, like, let's address everything for what it is. Outside of Malik, the receiving core, and look, I'm a Darius Slayton truther to an extent, right? Like, Darius Slayton is kind of one of those guys that gets underrated. I'm not sitting here trying to, like, Darius Slayton, I'm gonna give him his praise. But outside of those two guys, the room is very, very short. And irregardless of all that, when you already don't have a really good receiving room, you need to at least have an O-line that's going to give your receivers more time to get open and come back to the ball. Well, let's call it for what it is. 4 spots on this Giants O-line right now are desperately in trouble because the reality situation is John Michael Schmitz finished last year as the lowest graded center in the league, and he had the worst pass block grade. His pass blocking on film was atrocious, right? Again, rookie year. Yeah, could he make a big leap this year? It's possible. But the leap he's going to have any type of impact on this team is going to be a leap so ginormous, I don't know if he's capable of it in one season. Especially when, you have Stinney on the left, running on the right, Evan Neal outside of him. Minus Andrew Thomas, this line it's desperate. It is dire. And then behind them, who do they have? Daniel Jones or Drew Lock. Like, I don't think enough people are stating how dire of a situation it is on the offensive side of the ball. And then we'll move over. Look, I'll move over to the defensive side. Yeah, look, Dexter Lawrence is going to make up for a lot of the ills of this team. But to the left and right of him, we got Nunez Roches. And then on the other side of him, we got Jordan Phillips. And again, 2 guys have not played the best ball of their career, to put it as nicely as possible, over the last few seasons, right? They're really on the bottom end of the grading scale of the film has not been productive, right? Linebacking core, not, right.
That's
it could
what
be
I
worse.
was
With
thinking
Isaiah
of.
Simmons, Okereke.
Bobby Okereke. That's what I was thinking
Right,
of.
they got a good
line,
linebacking
though.
core.
Yeah.
But then we go to the corners. The cornerback room is also just in the nicest way possible. I'm just, I don't like to knock on guys, but the corner room is it's shaky to say the least. And then you lost your second best player on the entire team last year. You replaced him with a guy who could hopefully come to the same ceiling in Nubin, but Xavier McKinney was playing special football last year.
Like, McKinney and Nubin are just different players. Like, Xavier McKinney is a lot quicker, in my opinion. Nubin is a little bit of a bigger of a guy. It's just, I'm not saying he can't be what McKinney is, but you're just going to be getting a different type of player back there.
No, and I think let's put it like this too. Darren Waller is potentially retiring, and if he's not retiring, he's definitely not the same player he used to be. I know you replaced him with Theo Johnson, but as we know, Theo Johnson is one of those guys where the production on tape never matched the athletic profile. So if he ends up being that kind of guy in the league, you didn't necessarily address tight end the way you should have. It's just, there's a lot of ways that I'm going to look at this offseason for the Giants, and I'm going to say, how about this? The more that I'm even analyzing their offseason, I think we gave them a pretty generous grade. I think we actually gave them a pretty generous grade.
Yeah, I mean, It's just I don't know how it could be higher, but I also struggle like giving them lower. So with all that being said, got to see for the Giants. Moving into the Philadelphia Eagles, probably one of the best offseason grades we have. Well, we actually had a decent amount of A's, but the Philadelphia Eagles with an A. Getting Kenny Pickett for cheap, I think, is a good get. Saquon Barkley re-signing A.J. Brown, re-signing Devonta Smith. I think their draft was great. Getting Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, and then Will Shipley and Jeremiah Trotter, and adding Trevor Keegan to that already deep offensive line. And let's not forget about Johnny Wilson. Just adds a completely different type of receiver to that room. I really, really like what the Eagles did this offseason. Obviously, they also added like Albert O. I don't know how you feel about him, but I think he's good tight end depth. I just don't know how you can not like what the Eagles did. And time again, my thing with the Eagles and the reason we continue to grade them so highly is because they, and we talk about it all the time, even in the You Don't Know Ball chat, these GMs overthink like shit. Like hell. They always overthink it. It's like the Eagles just make the easy, obvious decisions, and they continue to do it in this year's free agency class and draft class.
And then Howie Roseman gets gassed for it, and he's probably sitting there like, dude, what the fuck? I'm just not an idiot, but I appreciate all the support. Like, no, jokes aside, I think really, the only thing that you could maybe say that I would have liked to see them attack a little bit more was really kind of going at that wide receiver 3 and really trying to get more of a, like a guy that really complements A.J. Brown and Devontae Parker, and Devontae Smith a little bit more, because they went with Devontae Parker, who, again, I always remind viewers, statistically, the worst separator in the league 3 seasons in a row. I'm not trying to harp on the man. It's actually a real statistic. But I think, so with that being said, I think Aeneas Smith is either going to take that role and run with it and just be that new slot number 1 for him, or I could very much also see Johnny Wilson finding a way to just be a big slot for them. And all of a sudden, we have a starting 3 receiver group of either A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Aeneas Smith, who really adds the element of quickness, that burst, that route running. And if not, Johnny Wilson, who's just, we have a 6'3" monster and then a 6'7" guy right next to him. And then we got Devontae on the other side. I mean, really, no matter how you slice it.
You have Saquon and Dallas Goedert. Like, their offense, we've seen Hurts has excelled whenever he has tons of weapons around him. And, people want to knock Hurts for that, but the reality is every quarterback should have tons of weapons around him. And if you want to be competitive, that's what you have to have. Their offense is stacked. It is stacked. Even with Jason Kelce retiring, like, their offensive line is still really good.
Oh, absolutely stacked. Cam Jurgens coming in. It's going to be, he's not going to be Jason Kelce, but I think he's going to fill the role just fine. This offensive line is still going to move really well. And then to add to your point, I'm changing what I'm saying, because this really made me realize that is why my final prediction is why we're going to see Johnny Wilson win that big slot role and take that over. Because as far as what you can do in the run game, then having A.J. Brown, Goddard, and Johnny Wilson on the field at the same time, along with that O-line, you can just move anybody any way you want. And just with Saquon, it's going to get scary.
Yeah, I think Saquon may have one of his biggest seasons yet this year. So moving in to the Washington Commanders, we have them at a B. I'm not gonna lie, I think I understand. Obviously, when we grade the free agency class and we grade the draft class, the grades are exclusive to what they did strictly in free agency and strictly in the draft class. Now, when we can marry the two classes together to put together the final roster, I think that rounds out the grades a little bit better, because I did not love the free agency class at the time, but I think it complements the draft class really, really well. The area that I think they really, really missed on is tackle. I think they are going to struggle really bad at tackle this year, and that's kind of one of the worst positions to struggle at when you have a rookie quarterback who is going to start immediately in a Jaden Daniels. the fact that they were able to get Jerzon Newton at their second round pick, Mikey Sanders still to add to that cornerback room. Obviously, Forbes hasn't been everything that we'd hoped he'd be. And then Ben Sinnott at tight end, and even Luke McCaffrey. Like, I really like their draft class this year. They add Zach Ertz, who can be a safety blanket for Jaden Daniels. Overall, like I said, I didn't love their free agency class, but I think their draft class complements it as well as almost any of the two classes in the NFL this year.
No, 100%. I think, like, for starters, because I agree, I think here's the most important thing for Commanders fans to understand, because this is really the bottom line as far as how things are going to go specifically this season, right? If Brandon Coleman can come in and really overproduce where he was projected to go, and he can be that guy for you guys, because look, the reality is they spent their third round pick on their blind side, right? I mean, they said, hey man, hey Jaden, here's your blind side. It's our third round pick, hopefully it works out well. And again, where Brandon Coleman was generally, kind of overdrafted to the consensus, a little bit of a surprise, like if that ends up working out, and then on top of that, if Nick Allegretti can come in and play how he played in the Super Bowl for the Chiefs, and he can do that for you for 17 weeks, all of a sudden, truthfully, this line is starting to come together. But again, those are two contingencies that I have absolutely no clue if I can say for certain are going to happen. But that's the biggest thing, is if those two guys can come together and actually be something productive for this team, all of a sudden, I will admit, things are turning around. And if Jahan Dotson can make a big jump this year, the receiving core of Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, and Luke McCaffrey, if Luke can be the player that I think a lot of people think he can be, knowing his pedigree and a lot of other things, look, I'm not saying, and Ben Sinnott, like you touched on, one of my guys, I'm not going to sit here and say that they set Jaden up for failure. I mean, truthfully, Jaden's actually in relatively a pretty good position right now. I think what concerns me, and I think you'll agree most, I'll actually say what I think that they whiffed on most this offseason, where this is going to be their biggest issue far and away, in my opinion, bro, is that they did not decide to address the edge rusher situation by any capacity. And when you already have struggling young DBs, which is also another quintessential part of understanding Commanders' woes, and you got rid of your best DB from last season, right? All of a sudden, it's like, you're setting your DBs up for failure, and you're setting your edge rushers up for failure.
You signed a bunch of guys in free agency outside of Dorrance Armstrong that really don't move the needle, and then you take a late round swing on a guy as well. Obviously, you have, Newton, Payne, and Allen on the interior, but you hope Dan Quinn, being the guy that he can be as a defensive coordinator, as a head coach, like scheming up those guys for success, like you hope he can elevate them. Like, I agree with you in terms of, like, they kind of missed out on that, but I don't think you can address everything in one offseason. I think your gripe with the edge is kind of my thing with the tackle situation. The reason I am so strong on the tackle situation is because you have this rookie QB, and you really want him to succeed. And a bigger issue I have is the fact that, like, Jaden scrambles so often, even in clean pockets. Imagine if a pocket's closing on the left or right side and he's just scrambling more than he needs to be. So I'm going to be very interested to see how the Commanders' offense runs this year, because I will say he definitely has the wide receivers and tight ends to do it. Like, he has enough in the pass catching department to get that area done. So overall, I think they've set up Jaden pretty well. I like I said, I just would like to see them. And, you don't know what's going to happen when all these cuts happen and all these teams have to get down to their top, 53. So we could see some additions there. Some veterans get cut. And, overall decent offseason for the Commanders, who now have a franchise quarterback.
And I'll say before we move on to the next team, last thing for the Commanders fans, because I didn't think of it till you just planted the seed, but it's a great point you made. The reality is too, though, look, Dan Quinn defenses that have become elite, which is basically, almost everywhere he goes, again, minus the Cowboys. The Cowboys is a completely different example. But, right, the other two situations, he definitely never had any elite edge rushers around him, and he made it work just fine. This man had Dante Fowler touching 15 sacks. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, I'm going to let Dan Quinn cook. Maybe he's about to do the same thing for Dorrance Armstrong here. I guess we're just going to have to wait and see, like.
So overall, a decent offseason for the NFC East, really kind of top heavy with the Eagles and the Commanders. But Moving into the AFC North, we have the Cincinnati Bengals at a B plus. So, Dobbs, how do you feel about how the Bengals addressed their offseason? It was kind of interesting because it didn't seem like they made a ton of splashes.
Yeah, no, not definitely not. I think, how about for starters, I think the area I would say that I'm a little bit disappointed they didn't address more is I thought that they were going to do a little something to address the cornerback room. Didn't really do that. And if you're a Bengals fan, you might disagree with that. I know you got young guys, like I know DJ Turner, right? We haven't even given him a full year really. I get it. You want to see, and maybe it's just that's the logic, that's the thought process from the Bengals. Talk about the good stuff though, right? Look, I love the fact that they added Geno Stone is like one of the most underrated moves of the entire offseason that like nobody talks about for some reason, right? Von Bell getting back is huge. I think, here's something though, again, that's been looming that I think that nobody's really talking about for whatever reason. I'm still going to want to talk about it. If Trey Hendrickson ends up getting traded, right, all of a sudden, the D line is going to take a huge, huge bump. And it's like, who's going to be the guy to come in and fill that same production? So very quickly, right, the defense, could this defense, start, for a lack of a better term, could it really slow down a lot? Potentially. As far as the O line, though, we can agree, adding Trent Brown was awesome. And then Amarius Mims to learn behind him was fantastic use of draft capital. That's all awesome. The T. Higgins potential, I don't want to say replacement at this point because, again, he's not the same skill set. But getting Jermaine Burton out the draft, knowing you're probably not going to have T. Higgins for more than another year,
My
was
favorite
great,
pick in the draft.
great value.
My favorite pick in
Just,
the draft.
just fantastic value. Again, Zach Moss, too, a guy who I think is going to very much overproduce to the expectations of this offense. I think he'll be able to take that Joe Mixon role and play it really well. And it's just about really, as Bengals fans know, you keep Joe Burrow healthy this year, along with the fact that I like most of the draft class from this season. It was a good offseason relative all in all.
Yeah, I really like the draft pick of Eric All too as a tight end. Like I think he can be that guy that they develop. I think the
Yes.
Bengals have been a team that has really been looking for like stability and like dominance at tight end. Like, could you imagine if the Bengals had the TJ Hawkinson, how deadly they would be on offense? I think if they just run out this year with T. Higgins and Jermaine Burton is allowed to be your wide receiver 3, and obviously they used a third round pick on him, so that's pretty indicative of how they feel he can contribute, especially because he was off a lot of teams' boards because of the off the field issues. If you're able to trot out, Jamar Chase, Eric All, Jermaine Burton, T. Higgins, and they all be productive players for you, and I think Joe Burrow is definitely a player that elevates his team, the Bengals could make a strong effort to be in the Super Bowl again. Now, I do like the addition of Trent Brown, and like you said, with the Amarius Mims signing, what does worry me, like you, I think we have a lot of the same thoughts on this team, is if Hendrickson does get traded or Hendrickson is not on the team this year, that defensive line does take a step back. And we know, being in the AFC, when you're playing Patrick Mahomes, when you're playing Josh Allen, when you're playing all these great quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson, even when you're playing Tua, if you can't get to the quarterback, it will expose a secondary, regardless if they're top tier or not. I think outside of having a great quarterback, essentially you really need to have an aggressive defensive line as well to make the quarterback get the ball out of his hands quicker. And that can go for any team, but especially when you're playing in a very quarterback heavy conference.
No, absolutely. And I just want to touch on too, because I didn't even say it, but back to Eric All real quick. Eric All is one of those guys where, let's talk about some of the biggest sleepers in the draft and also just where they went to the perfect spot. Eric All, when you're watching the tape, is kind of one of those guys where you're like, this guy could really develop into that QB's best friend kind of role. Always coming back to the ball. He's always patient with the routes. And on top of that, for his size especially, relatively a really, really solid blocker. So I think he can come in this Bengals offense and just really kind of take over that tight end one role much quicker than a lot of people might expect. He really could be one of Joey B's new number one kind of target. Obviously not going to be the number one target. Very likely. But he could definitely produce much heavier than a lot of people are expecting very quickly.
moving into the Cleveland Browns, we have them with a B. So overall, I think they are still suffering from that Deshaun Watson deal because it's another year without a first round pick. And I do like what they did a lot with their second round pick, taking Michael Hall Jr. I do like the addition of Zach Zinter, Jamari Thrash. Looking at their offseason, I just find it so funny. Like, if you look at their free agent class and you look at their draft class, this is the most like Browns offseason ever. Like, what was exciting about their offseason outside of like the overpaying of Jerry Jeudy? This was such a weird offseason, and I really did not like the Jeudy deal. Obviously, you bring back Zadarius Smith, Devin Bush, Jordan Hicks. Like, they did what they needed to do on defense, like they always do. But I don't know if they did really anything to put that offense over the hump. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know.
No, I think I would have really liked to see more investment into the O-line depth because we're at a point where, and again, a lot of brands, I said brands, a lot of Browns fans will tell you, look, the reality of the situation is at this point, I think the jury is more out on Jedrick Wills than it is in, where a lot of Browns fans are starting to look at Jedrick Wills like the weak link. So the fact that you didn't address any type of real, guys with upside enough to take over that starting role is a little bit concerning, especially when we look at Deshaun Watson as, if he's going to get back to being that guy that we know he used to be, it's going to take that same comfort and that same level of trust in his O-line he used to have back when he had an amazing blind side.
Let me ask you this. Do you think there's a chance that they move DeJuan Jones to left tackle?
At this point, you would be throwing your best five out there. And there's actually not even a doubt about it. Like, that's, to be honest, actually, matter of fact, let me take a look at the...
Yeah, he's backing up Jack Conklin at right tackle now. But
see, that's what you got to ask yourself,
DeJuan like, played last year.
Yeah, if you're the Browns, what are you thinking? Because, yeah, no, tape doesn't lie on Jedrick Wills, and more than anything, Browns fans won't lie to you. It's not going to work much longer if he keeps playing at that same standard. And to me, DeJuan Jones gives you just better upside in general at this point. He's an absolute tower of a man. I know, as we always say, the switch from the left to the right's not easy, but I think for a guy as athletic and just rangy as DeJuan is, a guy like him, it'll make it about as easy on the transition as it could be. So
I guess my thing is, like, we don't even really need to talk about the defense because the defense is not the problem. The offense, I like Jamari Thrash, and I think he can be a good player. But when you look at their wide receiver core, it's really fucking weak. Like, it really is. Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, and then you have David Bell, Jamari Thrash, Cedric Tillman. Like, outside of Amari Cooper, you don't have that dominant receiving core. And yes, you have Njoku, who I like, but he really wasn't the same player he was with Watson that he was with Flacco. So we know what the Browns, they love to run the ball. They're a heavy run team. But you got to win through the air, and I don't know if you're doing that with just Amari Cooper.
Yeah, no, well, okay, that's so on top of that, and what I want to really say is this. I know, look, I'm going to get flack from the Browns fans, but I don't care because I'm always honest. Browns fans, to me, are way too over-optimistic about the Jerry Jeudy signing. And I actually know one personally, a good friend of mine who's a Browns fan, but it's like, I'm going to say it like this. Especially if you've been watching all 22 over the last 3 or 4 years. I don't know what you've seen from Jerry Jeudy that makes you think he's just going to make some enormous leap, especially with Deshaun, who he has no rapport with, who has been struggling. I just don't understand the capital that you guys invested in Jerry Jeudy, literally in the slightest. That's just the nicest way I can say it. That, to me, is the thing that single-handedly brings down the grade from them the most this offseason, because you could have done so much more with that money. To me, Jamari Thrash could have been genuinely filling his role this upcoming season, and you could have at least seen how much upside do we really have in Jamari versus, you know what I mean, the 50 whatever mil that you spent on Jeudy. I'm not a fan of it in the slightest, not at all.
Especially when you have a super, super competitive division like the AFC North, and we have the Baltimore Ravens at an A-. So I did not have an issue with what they did in free agency. But I think their draft class was really kind of what carried their grade because I think, I don't know how you feel, and I'll let you kind of run with this one. I think they did everything necessary in free agency, but I think their draft class is where they really addressed all their issues. I think there are still some question marks on the offensive line, but overall, Dobbs, how are you feeling about the Ravens this upcoming season?
No, I think, look, the thing is this, I used to give the man a lot of shit. I say I'm always an honest man. I always come around when it's time to come around. Eric DaCosta, right? I was wrong. I understand the vision of how you build your teams. I am starting to completely understand why you go about things the way you guys go about things, right? I see the Ravens' vision clear, crystal clear. I think, though, the one thing that we'll agree on is, look, this team has built a roster about as well as you can build a roster. The issue comes in for me personally, where again, you just haven't given Lamar his alpha dog. Where again, I love Zay Flowers as a complementary piece, as just a slot beast, so as a seam burner. Love him in that role. But I don't know if Zay Flowers is ever going to be a 1,400, 1,500, 1,300 plus, yard kind of guy who can really dominate and take over in those cold November, December, January, February nights. And again, could he? For sure. And especially after we saw in the playoffs last year, I think that's the thing that the Ravens are really missing right now. And like we said, with the guy that they took, taking Devontae Walker, you kind of just took another guy that you already have an entire room full of. Guys that are burners, but the hands are inconsistent. The route tree is not very developed. So that's really the only thing about the Ravens you can sit here and question. But outside of that, look, they planned ahead with, I'm going to butcher his name. I'm going to learn here over time. With Almuvai Luau. I'm trying my best to pronounce it, but their guard that they drafted last year who sat the whole season, he's going to play starting left guard this year, at least according to the depth chart. So if he comes in and he plays really well, you have a line of guys that are all very, very competent, good guys across the line. I guess you could say, though, the guard situation is far from being set, but at least you have guys that you're confident in will be able to do their job. Right. This defense is very, very stacked relative to the rest of the league. I mean, they've done a great job. Trenton Simpson coming and taking over that spot for Patrick Queen, who, if he can play how he did when he got reps last year, will be able to come in and replace him very well. Right. Like the Ravens have done everything they need to do in terms of thinking ahead, staying a step ahead. They've done it. They've done all that. Now it's just a matter of really, and again, it goes against all my philosophies, but for a team like the Ravens, when you have a quarterback like Lamar, I think it's the one time where the contingency comes in place where it is a little bit different, where it's like that's the one thing we have to monitor. Is this receiving core enough for the way that they play ball and the style that they play to be able to take you all the way? To me, that's the biggest question that we have to see answered from the Ravens.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Henry signing was great. Obviously, they lose J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, which, in my opinion, they'll be fine. I do like Keaton Mitchell a lot if he can get back to being healthy. The Justin Madubuike signing was something that they needed to get done. I do really
critically
think
underrated.
the Josh Jones signing is very underrated. I think Josh Jones can play starting tackle in the league. And we know outside of Ronnie Stanley and Tyler Lindenbaum, they're kind of playing musical chairs right now with the offensive line. Now, getting Nate Wiggins and also TJ Tampa in the draft, I think is great. Roger Rosengarten, obviously, mixed opinions on him. I think he can be valuable for them. And Idisa Isaac.
Listed as the starter on the depth chart right now, worth noting.
Oh, Roger Rosengarten? Yeah, they must be
right
really
now
high
he is
on
currently
him.
starting over Falele on the right tackle spot as of right now.
I really like Tampa. I think here's what I will say. Outside of getting a more dominant pass catcher on this team, the Ravens knocked this offseason out of the park because they pretty much addressed everything they needed outside of a dominant wide receiver. So you obviously can't get everything done. Like in most of these teams, they're missing one thing, and that's fine because at the end of the day, you can't get everything done. So overall, the Ravens did what they need to do, and maybe they go out and trade for somebody later on. Well, who knows? They're not really keen to trading for people giving up a ton of capital, but overall, I think they did a good job this offseason. So,
No, absolutely.
finishing off the AFC North, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers with an A minus. So I really like their draft class. I did not like their free agency class all that much. And, you know, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, it's going to be a quarterback kind of carousel. I know Russ is probably going to be the starter, but as soon as Russ plays a bad game, it's going to be, oh, put in Justin.
The
And
writing's on the wall.
I think the biggest thing about the Steelers offseason that I really, really, really just did not like, they did not address wide receiver that well. Van Jefferson, Cordero Patterson, George Pickens, Roman Wilson. That is who Russ, outside of Pat Freiermuth and Najee Harris, that is who Justin Fields or Russell Wilson is throwing to. I think they did a great job addressing the offensive line. They did an amazing job addressing the offensive line. But another thing was receiver. They traded Deontay Johnson, and they just didn't really get an answer for it. So overall, you know, I think the defensive line is also getting older. I don't know if they addressed that enough. Peyton Wilson's a dog, but he may only play off his first contract because he only has, like, I think one functioning ACL.
And he's already midway through his 20s. I mean, like this,
It's just a tough thing where it's like the Steelers have talent, but their future seems kind of short-sighted. Just with the way that they are built. I like Mason McCormick too as a developmental piece for their offensive line, as a depth piece, but it's just, okay, realistically, let's say Justin Fields doesn't pan out and Russell Wilson is not your guy. Where are you in 2 years? TJ Watt's older. Hayward is older. You don't have really a solution at wide receiver. I just don't know where you go from here with the Steelers.
And see, I'm going to try to give you some clarification of how I feel about it, because I agree. Everything you're saying, don't get me wrong, we literally are in full agreement, especially about the receiving core, everything. I think, and this is the thing, is Steelers fans are not going to want to hear this. I'm going to prepare for the comments on this one. But I'm also incredibly objective and realistic at all times. You know me. I'm not going to sit here and fray away from what I believe is the truth. I think the truth is the Steelers know, especially the Steelers front office. Realistically, right now, their best chance to be able to win in the immediate future is like, okay, on the assumption that Justin makes some huge leap and ends up being the guy for us that the Bears thought he could be for them, right? Oh my goodness, we can actually be in the thick of things and really figure out things out quickly. But if not, I think this draft really tells a story where the reality is they're doing things the way I always say that you should do things, where it's not flashy and it's pretty ugly right now. But down the road, when it comes time to find that quarterback, if assumedly as we are right now, Russ or Justin is not that guy for you long-term, whoever that young guy steps in is going to be, they're going to step in where they are going to have 4 or 5 actual really good linemen around them. So I think when you look at it like that, it makes a lot more sense. That's really the only way I can really think that of how the Steelers' future looks right now, is that they're really thinking years ahead, where it's like, we really probably don't have the guy in the building right now. So let's make sure that when we have that guy in the building, he doesn't come into an Aaron Rodgers situation where we have the guy, but he can't even stay healthy because we haven't provided him with enough around him.
Yeah, I get that.
I mean literally around him.
I just struggle because a lot of their like key pieces on defense in terms of that line are getting so much older. But I don't know. I don't know. Like I get what you're saying though. The offense is setting up nicely for a younger quarterback to come in and take its place. So I get that. I do. Maybe it's just kind of a renovation of how we're used to the Steelers. Maybe they're starting to kind of look to offense to lead the team. I don't know if that'll ever happen. I'm finally seeing it with the Bears, so maybe the Steelers are making their way around. But overall,
Steelers competitive rebuild incoming.
Yeah, I mean, overall, if you're a Steelers fan, you got to be really happy with the draft class. I think you guys killed it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And they had a few good, like real quick, just, they had a few good free agent guys too. Like, I think getting Deshaun Elliott was another huge, like, really flew under the radar, but he's going to play real nice in the Steelers defense. Like, it was certainly not all bad, and there was plenty of, good on side of it. I just think, bottom line too, Van Jefferson as your wide receiver 3, you're not helping out the quarterbacks in the room currently. It's far from a finished product.
All right, well, that'll wrap up the AFC North. Moving into the NFC North, we have an A+ for the Bears. I promise you, this is not biased. Dobbs had a higher grade than I did, and he's a Saints fan. So, I mean,
This is true.
obviously, I think adding, Caleb Williams, DeAndre Swift, kind of beefing up the depth of their offensive line, getting Jalen Johnson re-signed, Kevin Byard, regardless of how you feel about him last year, I think he'll be an upgrade at safety over Eddie Jackson. And then obviously a very small but also good draft class. You get Williams, Odunze, Amagaji, who apparently teams had graded in their 40s before his injury. And then you get Austin Booker, a developmental edge, and the best punter in the draft. So I can't complain. Probably one of the best off seasons I can ever remember as a Bears fan. So, Dobbs, I'll kind of let you go. I just kind of rambled about him, but I want to see kind of more what you think.
Well, I think, look, here's the bottom line that everybody that is not a Packers, Vikings, or Lions fan is going to agree with, objectively speaking. Like, the Bears took themselves from just being in perennial, just meh. Like, just that's the easiest way to say it, right? Just meh. They're just biased. They're the Bears. Like, they're going to show up and surprise a few teams, but they're the Bears. They went from being that team to like the new era kind of like Bengals / Texans. Like, you guys immediately made that humongous jump. Like, the roster made a humongous leap this last season. And if Caleb can be the guy that, again, I believe he will be, the Bears have literally turned themselves into a perennial competitor in the NFC. The receiving core, it speaks for itself. The O-line is really coming together. Side note, before I move into the defense, I actually want to ask you about this. I'm very curious. I've been taking a look at the Bears depth chart. As of right now, Ryan Bates is listed as your guys' backup guard, and you guys have Coleman Shelton starting at center. I don't know if is that how things are going to go, or like?
I think it will, because Shelton's been the starting center for the Rams the last 2 years, and Bates has been a kind of swing interior offensive lineman for the Bills. I don't know if you know the whole story about him, but the Bears tried to sign Bates 2 years ago, and he was a restricted free agent, so the Bills matched the offer and kept him. So this is somebody who Poles has wanted for a while. I think so when the trade happened for Bates, a lot of people were like, oh my God, Poles just can't get the center position right. He doesn't invest. And I'm like, bro, this is obviously a depth piece. Like, there's no way after what we watched last year that he's going to repeat the same thing. Poles is at least competent. So that's what he's looking like. He's going to be probably their interior offensive lineman. He's going to be our swing guy. And then I'm imagining Kieran Abagaji is going to be the swing tackle. And Larry Borum is probably going to get the boot this year.
See, and I also wouldn't be surprised, though, because you could be spot on about Kieran. Again, and I know I'm in the minority, but I would not be surprised at all if he just up and takes Nate Davis' spot at camp. Like, that also something I could totally see that happening.
It's possible. They had talked about, Kieran potentially competing for Braxton Jones' spot, not right away, but even next year, being that starting left tackle.
No, yeah, and then if we move over to the defense, again, you guys really didn't have to do too much because the whole defense's identity is just being young and up and coming and like figuring out how to play together. But like, you made a few damn good additions, especially in Kevin Byard, like a veteran to just come in, really help these young guys to understand where they need to be, especially this DB room who is like very, very young. I mean, it's like the reality of the situation is, just to put it as short as possible, the Bears laid out the blueprint, or not that, they followed the same blueprint that the Bengals and that the Texans have presented, and they followed it to a T, if not potentially better. I mean, again, not to get ahead of myself, but if Caleb is who I think he is, if Rome is who I think he is, if Keenan Allen stays healthy, if this O-line stays healthy, the Bears could genuinely be an 11-12 win team this season. I mean, it's like the Bears have completely flipped the switch.
I really think that they can be like what the Packers were last year, like going to the playoffs, competing. And I will say this, the area I am most concerned about is the head coach. I don't know if Eberflus can win in those late game situations. Like, that is my biggest concern. I have less concern with the offensive coordinator, But overall, if the Bears, which I think they will do, because remember, there's going to be cuts. I think the Bears are still going to add a piece or two on the defensive line. I would not be surprised if at the trade deadline they also trade one of the seconds to go and get a defensive lineman. But a name I think about is Calais Campbell, going and getting a guy like that just to play for 1 year. I mean, they have done the 1 year rentals with Yannick Ngakoue, and it didn't really pan out, but you're really just kind of looking for bodies at this point.
No, absolutely. And again, guys that can make huge jumps. Gervon Dexter could make a huge jump next year. TJ Edwards came in and played much better than expected, really, really filled out that role that Eberflus needs in his defense. I mean, Sandborn had a good jump last year too. Like all the young guys looking that they're going to keep making jumps. I mean, Jalen Johnson with a monstrous jump, and then now the extension. Jaquan Brisker. And that's the thing I want to say is like not the biggest jump, but then you bring Kevin Byard in, and Kevin Byard is the perfect guy that can really help unlock and elevate Jaquan Brisker to his highest level. Tariq Stevenson, right behind Jalen Johnson. I mean, you guys have a fantastic room. Kyler Gordon, a bunch of young guys learning from good older guys. I mean, the Bears have set it up very, very well. And the reality is the Bears they're very much competing for a playoff spot next year. That's just really the only thing you can say at this point. It's up to them to show us how much that the hype has been worth it, but I think that at the least they're a playoff team.
One of the most underrated moves is definitely the punter. I mean, their punting was horrendous last year, and the statistics that show how many points there's a point differential based on, how well your punting is kind of crazy. So if you haven't seen that, go check that out. Another A+ in division, we have the Detroit Lions with an A+. Amazing free agent class, amazing draft class. I just don't know what to do. It's kind of fucking sickening being a Bears fan, watching the Lions become competent quicker than us.
No, see, the thing about the Lions, I think why it had to be an A+ is it's not even like they didn't make necessarily like all the moves in the world, but they just built perfectly on what they already had, and they did everything that they needed to do. Like I say, and I harp on all the time about the Lions, they were already in that situation, right, where, you're essentially a few bad decisions away from being in Lombardi land. Again, I can't guarantee how it would have ended, but against the same team that you beat early week 1 in the season. So if we look at it like that, and you made all the right all the right additions, right? Getting Zeitler and then Glasnow as your replacements for the 2 guards you lost. I mean, that's about as good as you can do far and away for just immediate replacements. I mean, Penei Sewell became officially the best tackle in the league last year, finally surpassing Trent. So not only do you have trenches across the board, you also have the best trenchman in the entire league at this point. Aleem McNeil made a humongous jump last year. You throw DJ Reader right next to him, and then you're going to have Chop Robinson. I mean, it's like,
No, not Chop. Not Chop.
No, not Chop. I'm sorry, not Chop. I'm mixing up other information. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm mixing up information. I don't know why. That's the Dolphins. But the point is, Davenport. With Davenport, here's my thing. Davenport's a good edge rusher, but the reality is, and I'll tell you as a Saints fan, right? Davenport's he's spotty when he's on the field. He plays 1 week, he's not playing the next 2 weeks. When he's out there, he's productive, but he's not out there the whole time. I mean, I think I would have liked to see a little bit more depth get added to the D-line in total, because from a depth standpoint, the Lions D-line is not the most stacked out group in the world, but they have very good starters. If they can stay healthy, the D-line is stacked. If not, we're going to have to ask some questions. That's really the main thing to monitor for the Lions, because other than that, they have really come and built just a very, very productive team where you can't really sit here and say much. I mean, we're now at a point where Carlton Davis, Terrion Arnold, and Ennis Rakestraw are going to be the starting 3 corners. I mean, their backup safety, I'm still mispronouncing his name a little bit here, but Ifeatu Melifonwu was playing fantastic last year when he had to step into that role. And if he gets to play backup, we're loaded on DB depth, which was now all of a sudden the biggest issue we had last year if you're a Lions fan. I mean, the Lions are sitting in a position where that Super Bowl window is literally being jammed open with a crowbar.
watching the Lions get Terrion Arnold and then get them see them get, ooh, I'm screwing up my words. Seeing them get Ennis Rakestraw Jr., I wanted to throw up. Like, these are both really good. Like, Terrion Arnold, my top corner in the class. Ennis Rakestraw was amazing. Like, I don't, it's just the fact that they were able to address that room so easily in the draft. And I know they gave up some capital, but to go get Terrion Arnold to be your CB1, just, I don't know. The Lions are sickeningly killing it. Moving on to the Green Bay Packers. We have them with a B. I like their draft class a lot more than their free agent class. I know the Packers really don't do much in free agency, regardless. And Jordan Morgan, I think, was a little bit polarizing for Packers fans because, oh, we can develop linemen, or Jordan Morgan's not that good. Like, Jordan Morgan is, yeah. Well, so here's my thing. Dobbs, do you think he's going to play guard, or do you think he's going to play tackle?
Well, I'll say this. As of right now on the depth chart, if it
He's
helps
listed at tackle.
if this was to lead, yeah, if this leads anyone to any conclusions, he's currently listed at left tackle. And I do believe he is going to be that left tackle. And again, I'll echo Bill Belichick's words, the man, the GOAT himself. On the McAfee broadcast, he, and I saw it afterwards, he said, man, dude, this guy is a smart player. I would not touch him. I would leave him at tackle. Belichick tried to tell y'all, man, this guy is a tackle. Look, yes, does he have the movement and all that to be a guard? Absolutely. But again, I'll keep harping on it. The film doesn't lie, guys. The film doesn't lie. Go watch Arizona versus UCLA. Go watch him the entire I think it was the first half. Might have been the second half. It was one of the two, obviously, versus Laiatu Latu. If you can turn on that tape and come to the conclusion that he shouldn't be left at tackle, I personally just don't know what to tell you, because he showed you that he has everything to be very productive tackle at the next level off of just one half of tape alone against Laiatu Latu. Dominated in the run game, dominated in the pass game, dominated on sweeps. He's fantastic getting out. He's fantastic off of the line. He is everything you need in an offense where running the ball has always been the bread and butter. He is going to provide you guys a long-term starter, which is why I've been kind of hurt that the Packers aren't seeing the vision. Packers fans, you guys have been tweaking on my boy Jordan Morgan.
So that's the other thing, is they signed Josh Jacobs, which can be basically a one-year deal. They brought back A.J. Dillon, but I really did like the addition of Marshawn Lloyd. I think he could be a really good player for them. And then also, after losing Tavondre Campbell, you add Edgerrin Cooper. I think he can pretty much do whatever you ask him to do. The only thing I am concerned about is I do like the addition of Javon Bullard, but I don't necessarily know if they addressed the cornerback room as much as they should have. It looks like they took 3 safeties in this draft, so I don't know if they're thinking about trying to convert one to corner or kind of what the move is there. They've obviously addressed it with McKinney for one of the spots, but overall, I think really the only weakness on the Packers right now is probably a little bit of O-line depth, which they drafted a center in Jacob Monk. But I would say overall, I'm most concerned about their cornerback room.
No, absolutely. I mean, to touch on the cornerback room, like let's just break it down for what it is right now. Eric Stokes is your number 2 corner, who has already been very, very shaky to say the least, right? And then corner 3, Carrington Valentine. Corner 4, Keyshawn Nixon. Right? Like, if you're a Packers fan, that's not who you want to be hearing is going to be stepping on the field if something happens to one of your 2 starters, or, for both. Like, you're in a situation where teams are going to be throwing the ball however they want all over you. No disrespect to those guys, but I don't think they're ready to step into starting roles. And those are guys that I think on a lot of other teams would be 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, at least on a lot of depth charts. You got them at 3rd and 4th, and I meant to say 4, you my point, 5, 6, 7. Like, having them as your immediate depth right behind Jair Alexander. And again, Eric Stokes on a lot of teams is not even a starting corner. It's like the depth you have here as Packers fans, it's got to worry you. I mean, that's definitely the number one thing about this team that has to be addressed if they're going to make a deep playoff run. To me, there's no other way around that.
moving into the final team of the NFC North, we have the Minnesota Vikings with a B plus. Now, I think they personally had a very, very good draft. What scares me is the capital that they've given up. Um, but I think what I liked a lot about their free agency class is you add those edges. You add Grenard, you add Van Ginkel, you add Blake Cashman. So you do a lot of work on that defensive line. I think something that was kind of left untouched again is the cornerback room. Lewis Cine has not been the player that you wanted him to be, and they took Kyrie Jackson, who I think is a very good player, and I think, is a big corner for them, but I don't know if you should be expecting him to really be your top corner in the room. If you look at their, it's Byron Murphy Jr. Oh, I forgot they got Byron Murphy. Let me stop. I like Byron Murphy, but I don't know outside of that. You have a Caleb Evans, Josh Metellus, Shaquille Griffin.
And Josh Metellus is kind of like an all over the field guy, especially in the Flores system. I mean, one snap Metellus is playing corner, the next snap he's playing D tackle for them. I'm not even kidding. He's literally all over the field, like literally Mr. Do Everything. So it's like, where is the corner depth?
Yeah, I don't know, but obviously they get their quarterback of the future. I think that solidifies kind of they're looking ahead. Obviously, they were forced to once Kirk Cousins left. But do you think that they play McCarthy this year? I really think they need to sit like Drake May, but I mean, I feel like they're more likely to sit him than the Patriots would be with May. But what are you feeling on this?
Same as I say about May. I'm gonna keep it short, simple, to the point. If they hold on to him and let him actually develop how he needs to develop, which we've seen, it's definitely the case. I think he will be a very productive pro for a long time, and he can really elevate this team. He gets thrown in the fire this year, I think we see a broken quarterback by year 2 or 3, and the fan base is turned on him, and it's a whole mess. And I see it very black and white like that.
All right, now let me ask you this. Who is going to a better situation, Caleb Williams or J.J. McCarthy?
Caleb Williams, far and away. Now, albeit, it's hard to argue against having Justin Jefferson, but minus the Justin Jefferson as a whole, the Bears situation is just, in my opinion, far and away better.
I see. Even as a Bears fan, I have thought it has been the Vikings, because Justin Jefferson obviously is the best receiver in football. You have a better O-line, and you have Kevin O'Connell. I think the coaching is a big thing. Yes, I like Shane Waldron. I don't think he's Kevin O'Connell. And I think the situation in Minnesota is better. I don't think it's like crazy, like far away, but overall, I think it is better in Minnesota. And I think obviously adding the running back in Aaron Jones was huge, because that was something we saw that they struggled with a lot last year.
No, absolutely. And also, assuming that he'll still be here when JJ gets in, he gives JJ the perfect outlet man out of the backfield, as Aaron Jones always was for Aaron Rodgers, and he's always been. Like, he's that guy who, and for Jordan Love last year, like, you need someone to leak out, plays breaking down. I need my guy on the flats. Aaron Jones isn't going to let you down, right? Like, that'll be definitely a very nice security blanket to have for any young quarterback.
All right, halfway through the league, we're moving to the AFC South. We have the Houston Texans with an A+. Yeah, lots of A+. I think a lot of teams had good off seasons. Dobbs, why did we give them an A+?
I think the Texans actually might be the one team who really, if I actually dare say, I think that they're the ones who ripped the A+ away the most, trying to think of the right word, just most commandingly, right? Like, they really demanded an A+ from this year from the offseason. Because, just to put it in simplest terms, the expectations we had for them last year, and then how much that they overachieved on those expectations. But they sat there and they said, that's still not good enough. You know what? Fuck that. We want to go all the way. We're going all in right now. You have to respect it. As a Saints fan, I certainly respect the approach. I've seen the team do it. And it should have led to a Lombardi. We're not going to get into that. Going all in. Look, I'm all for going all in all the time if you have the opportunity, and the Texans are in the most prime situation to do it. You add Joe Mixon, Stephon Diggs. There's so many guys with Danielle Hunter. Aziz Al-Shaair, and then also, who am I forgetting here? Another critical guy. Another critical guy. I can't forget. Um,
I'm trying to look.
why why am I not why can't I remember who it was? Give me a second.
Derek Barnett. I mean that helps, but I don't know if that's the guy you're thinking of.
I see. No, that's I'll get. It'll come to me in a sec. It'll come to me in a sec. But also, I think. Well, here. How about this
Oh,
too?
Danico Autry.
Kalen Bullock. Well, yeah, Danico Autry. Yeah, that's it. You're definitely you're filling out the D line, and then also Kalen Bullock. I think to me is the guy where again I don't know exactly where he's going to round out on this team, but I'm higher on Jalen Bullock than a lot of or than on Kalen Bullock than a lot of people were. I think he's going to find a really nice role in this defense. I mean, to me personally, the Texans went and really much like the Lions, they kind of put that crowbar in the window and really jammed open that Super Bowl window. And they said, you know what? We're a real threat the next 3 or 4 years. I don't know. Again, I can't speak past that with how much things change in the NFL. But for the next 2, 3, 4 years, the Texans are going to be right there with anybody. And they made it real loud and clear.
Well, they definitely are taking swings at corner. They signed 6 and then drafted 1 as well. I really like Kamari Lassiter to the Texans. I think it is a really good fit for them. Like I said, like it has been the theme for a couple teams, I think the cornerback position is something to be kind of concerned about. It's just not super great. But overall, I mean, we've seen how much D'Amico Ryans has been able to elevate this team. And now, this is what's going to be interesting. Do you think with a year of tape on CJ Stroud that he takes a step back, or do you think he kind of breaks the mold and goes forward? Because I have the same concern with Jordan Love.
See, I think both of them are going to be guys that break the mold because they're just so good in the most traditional sense where they both live in that pocket. They are just very like cerebral. They're not trying to do too much. They're just trying to get the ball where it needs to be. And I think you could say for both of them, granted, the Packers is in a different way, where the Packers is just more the rapport that they're going to have and the chemistry they'll have will be so much better than last year. But with the Texans, you can just outright say, I mean, they made a fat upgrade on offense where you had Stephon Diggs. If you can get Diggs to come and leave the bullshit at the fucking door, I mean, the reality is, dude, this team can actually be very special. It really, how about that? Jokes aside, the biggest key factor of this team's success this year is if Stephon can leave that ego at the door, and I really hope that he does.
I mean, if you pair Stephon Diggs with Nico Collins, who continues to ball out, and then if Tank Dell takes a step and he recovers 100%, like one of the best receiving cores in the NFL. I like their backfield, and something we didn't really talk about, the Blake Fisher pick, like that's really good interior or tackle depth. He can definitely be their swing tackle.
Oh, and he could look. He could take Titus Howard's spot, sure thing. And on top of that, even this in this cycle at camp, and I just want to remind all the Texans fans that told me there's no way the Texans are going to invest in the O-line. There's no way. Good teams always invest in their O-line. Texans fans, I know it's been a while since you guys have been good, but now that you guys are good again, it's time to get used to it. Good teams are going to always invest in that O-line. Make no mistake.
All right, moving into the AFC. Well, we're already in the AFC South. Moving into the Indianapolis Colts, we have them with an A minus. So, I like what they did in the draft, obviously more than their off-season or their free agency moves. They're one of those teams that doesn't really do much. They kind of just re-sign their own guys. But getting Latu, Adonai Mitchell, and Tanner Bortolini, all 3 of them, and even Jalen Simpson, like they put aside the narrative that was out on Adonai Mitchell and said, let's go get a first-round caliber receiver to pair up with our young quarterback who already has 2 really good players in Michael Pittman and Josh Downs. I think they set up Anthony Richardson for a ton of success this year.
Yeah, no. Well, I think the bottom line is, and look, as Anthony Richardson truthers, we got to hope that he shows out for us because really much like with Caleb Williams, the Colts have really given him no excuses. I mean, you really again, for the time that they had and the amount of resources they had, they really did the perfect job. And I really can't overstate it with the capital that they had. They put a really, really good line with the capital they had in a really good receiving core with the capital they had around A. Richie. So if A. Richie can't make it work with JT coming back, hopefully a lot healthier, this really, really good O line that they have with young guys even being added in, Goncalves, like if he can't make it work with this defense, who should be able to play above average this year with the addition of Latu, I mean, the bottom line is this: we're going to find out a lot about Anthony Richardson this year, and if Anthony Richardson's not the guy, you're going to have to move on quick because the window for this team is very open if you have the guy at quarterback. Because this roster is actually to the point now where the Colts are a very underrated roster. I think we can both agree on.
I think also the other thing is like people underestimate what they did last year with Gardner Minshew. Shane Steichen is the real deal. And let me ask you this, because I don't think people were necessarily fans. I don't understand why people don't like Michael Pittman. It's because he's not like a flashy player. Like, I don't understand it. Like, realistically, for $23 million a year, would you rather have Michael Pittman or would you rather have Calvin Ridley? Because I'm taking Michael Pittman every day.
So here's what I'll say. If there are people, because what's crazy is I didn't even know this was like some narrative. Is this actually like an NFL Twitter narrative right now?
When I was listening to a lot of talk on just like podcasts, like NFL podcasts, just from like analysis from like CBS, like stuff like that, it was a lot of like, yeah, well, do you want to give Pittman wide receiver one money? I'm like, but he's been the wide receiver one for them. Like what was he catching? Like eight catches a game last year.
No,
it was
I was gonna say
ridiculous.
Anybody who is willing to say that was clearly not watching the Colts on all 22. Michael Pittman is that guy who's not only going to find the soft spot, he has the soft hands where he's going to make the catch. He will go up and make the catch at the catch point in aggressive coverage. Oh, and on top of that, he had 109 catches, averaging, rounding up 11 yards a target last year. Yeah, he's not the most productive guy in the red zone, but we remember another legend himself that was never very productive in the red zone, and Julio Jones. Let me be clear. Is Michael Pittman Julio Jones? Fuck no, that's not what I'm saying. But the bottom line is you can be an incredibly productive number one receiver in the league and not be your guy's go-to or your team's go-to guy in the red zone. That's perfectly fine. If you're a touchdown stat watcher, just let us know now, because that doesn't translate to the other 99 yards across the field. You know what I mean? The reality is just because you're not catching balls in the end zone is not the end-all, be-all. And it's also because usually you're the guy that gets double teamed in the red zone, which is more than anything a testament to how much defenses respect you. So no, side tangent. But anybody willing to disrespect Michael Pittman, you got to come see me now. I'm Michael Pittman's defender at this point. You got to come see me and let me know.
Now, before we move into the Jacksonville Jaguars, I just want you guys to think about what Anthony Richardson's arm will look like with Adonai Mitchell's 4.33 speed and 6'4 frame. Moving in to the Jacksonville Jaguars, we have them at a B minus. This is just one of those teams where it's like, I don't know how to grade them. I like Brian Thomas Jr. I like Jerry Jones, but I don't know if I like anything else about the draft class. Like, it's the classic bulky draft class. Like, he's going to take traits over on-tape production every single time. And when you look at
he is.
When you look at the wide receiver room, it's Brian Thomas Jr., Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis. Like, it doesn't move me. Nothing moves me. Like, they should be better this year. I will say this. They should be better, but how much better? And how much better are you making yourselves for the future?
I'm number one. I harp on it. I'm sorry. I'm a harper on this one. Gabe Davis is robbing the bank legally this season, number one. Like, legalized bank robbery, he's competing with Floyd Mayweather. You know, Floyd always said he was the GOAT at legalized bank robbery. I don't know. Gabe Davis is rivaling him at this point. Look, jokes aside with my Gabe Davis fantasy dynasty beef. All the, if you know the lore, you know the lore. Look, the bottom line is this. I'm with you 1,000%. Whereas, look, is this, number one, you're in the AFC, so you have to get judged differently. As we always say, there's that AFC like tax
Tax.
on you when
Yeah.
you're in the AFC. I have to grade everything differently than I grade teams in the NFC. And it's like look, how about we'll start with this? Because it's like a timeline of events. The Jags shocked us, and they with the signings and re-signings they made across the O line. I think that's the first thing that really had us scratching our head because we went, wait a minute, you gave above average money to a lot of guys that were playing below average football, which already doesn't sound like a very good recipe for success. And you have your guy who's supposed to be the franchise guy behind center. You want to be giving him upgrades, not downgrades or stagnation, which is exactly, in my opinion, what the Jaguars did this last offseason. And with the receiving core, look, I love Brian Thomas Jr. You know, as I say, I can never knock my LSU guys, but Brian Thomas Jr. doesn't have a complete route tree. I don't know if he's ready to go be a number one in the NFL. And that's basically exactly what they're going to be asking him to do because we know that C. Kirk is very likely going to be eating in that slot role. Gabe Davis will probably be in that Y spot that he's very comfortable with. It's safe to assume Brian Thomas will be playing X in that same role, like we were just talking about earlier, where, you know, with Keon Coleman, it's like, I don't know if BT or Keon are ready to be facing off against really dominant press man alpha corners right away, which is exactly the situation they're going to be getting thrown into. There are positives. Like, you know, I like certain additions that they made, like Eric Armstead. But on top of that, it's like if Eric Armstead gets hurt at some point of the season, it just was a waste of money. And that's very, very potentially something that's going to happen knowing the track record of Eric Armstead. I mean, it's like, you know, yeah, getting Josh Allen back for this year was nice. Like that's always cool. But the D line is still far from being all the way put together, and they made a lot of reaches. Even though they were on my LSU guys, they made a lot of reaches on the D line for as far as the capital went. You're all essentially now, if I'm not mistaken, going to be the depth chart keeps changing. I don't even know what they're doing. Last time I checked, Darnell Savage was the slot corner. Now he's the starting safety again. I don't know what they're planning on doing as far as the corners go. There's just the simplest way we could say it, I think that you'd agree on, is that the Jaguars have a lot more questions than answers.
I'll tell you where they don't have a question: backup quarterback. I actually did like the move for Mac Jones quite a bit, but
we'll definitely give him that one.
Yeah, banking on your I mean, I guess that's been a thing kind of in the league the last year or two is teams are much more willing to spend on backups because the reality is, you know, maybe once your starter goes down, your season shouldn't just automatically be over. So, good
Nick
job.
Foles, the king of the backup QB movement.
Trent didn't pour himself some Tito's that day when he made the trade, but in the draft room, he was loaded.
Oh, in the draft room, blacked out Trent.
Blacked out Trent. Tito's Trent. All right, so moving to the last team in the AFC South, we have the Tennessee Titans with a B. Now, I liked their draft. Okay, I will say this. With the Commanders as well, I think their draft class complemented their free agency class quite a bit. I still think you have an issue at a guard spot and an issue at left tackle because something that's not on this list as well is they signed Tyler Boyd as well. So their wide receiver room is a little bit loaded right now. But you have Cushenberry, you have Skronsky, you have J.C. Latham, who could also play guard if he doesn't work out at tackle. But besides, you know, one of the guard spots and one of the tackle spots, this offense is fully loaded to try to see what Will Levis has. And I think that is the goal of this year.
Yeah, we'll say, like, here's the thing. I'm going to say I've come around much more to the Titans after the draft. Because, like you're saying, the draft married very well to the free agent decisions. Like, the reality is this. I don't think that they were the team that was in the position to go spend all that money on L'Jarius Sneed. I don't think it's going to age very well, and I will stand on that. However, I understand taking the shot, right? Like, I get it. If you think he can evolve and be an even better player off the contract, and he'll keep getting better even after he gets paid, which is something we don't see happen very often. But if you think he's going to be that guy, you know, all power to you on making that signing, right? Or that trade and sign. And then Chidobe Awuzie too, right? Like, The corner room has definitely been to an extent revitalized. It's definitely different than it was before. I think though that's the biggest thing is we can sit here and say realistically, how much did the team change from last year? And it's the thing is it's all contingent on Will Levis making a humongous jump. But if Will Levis doesn't make that humongous jump and anybody on this O line goes down, like yes, the receiving core looks a lot better, but again, Calvin Ridley getting overpaid, already coming off of a relatively underwhelming season. There's just like we just said about the Jags. I personally have more questions than answers about the Titans. I will say though, my favorite thing that I'm very excited about, or I don't think enough analysts really just looked at it through just like they should with a magnifying glass. They kind of looked at it way too broad. Look, we're talking about you're going to have Tavondre Sweat in the middle of a D line that happens to have not just Jeffrey Simmons and Harold Landry, but Sebastian Joseph Day, Arden Key. They're getting one-on-ones all game long. I mean, defending the Titans D line is going to be a headache for a lot of offenses.
How do you
It's
run
just a
on it?
matter of like, yeah, it's just a matter of him being able to stay healthy and stay out of the bullshit that we've seen that he's been involved in this offseason process. But I'm a huge fan of that pick. I don't care where the consensus had him. I know that we're going to look back on that pick and everybody's going to be, oh, silly me. I overthought it. You know, how could a guy who's 6'4", 370 not pan out in a 3-4 defense? Like, it makes plenty of sense that, yeah, we're going to look back on that one and say that as long as he stays out of the bullshit, the Titans really hit a home run. But bottom line is, I think you agree, more questions than answers as far as the Titans offseason went.
Yeah, I think I will say this. I feel like those questions can be easily answered once we see it all put together on the field. Like if it melds together somehow with what they were thinking in the front office and the head coaching room, then good. Like I can see how this works. I can understand it now with the draft class. But there's still some things where it's like, okay, but if this doesn't work, obviously that's everything in the NFL, but if this doesn't work, then it looks rough because it's like, okay, we overspent. Like, I don't love the overspending in the cornerback room. I don't know if that was necessary. I would have rather overspent on the offensive line to protect Levis than in the secondary.
No, absolutely, bro. Absolutely. I would agree with that 1,000%.
All right, moving into the NFC South here, we have the Atlanta Falcons with a B minus. You know, I really did not like their draft class. Trice and Dorless, I think they got at good value, but Rook over Johnny Newton was very questionable to me. They did get Darnell Mooney, who I do think will fit really well with Kirk Cousins, but I think this team will elevate because of the new coaches and because of the quarterback. But when you're looking at it from a sheer roster perspective, how much really did they improve during the offseason, through the draft, and then also through their free agency class? I would say not a ton outside of Kirk.
No, yeah. I mean, I would agree with you on that 1,000%. I think just the biggest thing is like the biggest deterrent was if again, Michael Penix, we get it for the future potentially, but we've already harped on it, and I'm not going to like keep part. It's just when you take a project guy, you want them to be on the more raw side of things, and very obviously that's not where Penix stands. Penix was arguably the most pro-ready guy, so from that perspective, and how much money you're going to be paying him, it's like that has to knock your offseason grade. Where again, like we were just talking about, like if the Falcons could have just gotten an all-pro type of player, whatever it would have been, whatever position group with that 8th overall pick, you really shot yourself with the chance to go and shoot yourself on a miracle Super Bowl run with the way that this roster is built. But they very clearly didn't value doing that. They valued the future more. And again, I get it, but sometimes when you play things too safe, you miss your window. And that very well might have been what we just witnessed with the Falcons off of literally just one decision. I don't mean to be like critical about it, but it's just the truth of how things can go in the NFL sometimes, right? We know windows open and close very quickly. And I think it's just a little bit cute to try to play with that 8th overall pick when you had a chance to really load up with the future blue chip guy, whether it was Latu, Turner, Terrion Arnold. Right? They could have done so many things in that spot. And again, granted, where Terrion went, we're saying Terrion that early, that's crazy.
But you could
again,
trade
for
back.
how we valued Terrion, And knowing what he could have brought to this team, it makes a lot more sense. Putting him next to AJ Terrell, you get my point. There's just a lot of things they could have done that they didn't do. And on top of that, wasn't a fan of very many of the draft picks. I thought even, again, I know Braylon Trice has his fair share of stands at this point, Washington fans, but me personally, I never was very big on Braylon Trice, especially post-combine. It's just, I don't know how well his game is going to translate to the league. Yeah, just really wasn't a big fan of too many of their picks. It is what it is. I think Rook's going to provide really good depth, and I think he'll be a good starter in the future. But that just goes back to what we already were saying, mortgaging a potential Super Bowl window now for one in the future when you already potentially had one. I just don't really understand the vision with that personally.
Well, another spin on it is like, with the 8th overall pick, you have a new head coach and he's a defensive head coach. You could easily get the best defensive player in the draft or trade back a couple spots and still get the best defensive player in the draft. I wonder how lined up the GM and the head coach were on that pick, because if I'm the head coach and I'm looking at the roster, evaluating what it is, and know that we desperately need D-line help, why the fuck would I ever want a quarterback when I just signed one for 4 years?
Well, and here's my thing that I'm going to say too, that this is where I think, and this is where I don't ever hear anybody talking about this discourse, but this is where I personally stand. Like, look, I get it. Okay. So if we're going to look at it in the most bleak, like, here's how it would work, even if it doesn't work terms, like, well, what if Kirk gets injured this year and Penix has to step in? Well, to me, the reality is Penix is not going to take you to the promised land his rookie year. Like, we're asking a lot out of Penix at that point. Is that likely? Absolutely not. So here's my thing. You could have just waited till next year if you're not in on Kirk and been like, all right, we gave Kirk a potential blue chip guy. We really loaded up this roster. I don't think Kirk's going to be the guy long term. I think then you pull the trigger next year with your first round pick. If it's a later pick where then you get you didn't spend as much capital, but it was still the same mission, still the same plot at hand. I just think they forced their hand on what they could have waited for way too early.
Moving on to our next team in the NFC South, we have the Carolina Panthers with a B. So I liked the Jonathan Brooks pick, and that was about it. I really liked a lot more what they did in free agency. I think they solidified the interior of their offensive and defensive line. I know Panthers fans are all over the Jadeveon Clowney. I was thinking of Jatavion Sanders.
I know, that was hilarious.
I was screwing it up. But I think the Panthers definitely raised the floor of their team, and I actually really do like what they did with the running back room. Rashad Penny, Jonathan Brooks, Chuba Hubbard. I don't know. Miles Sanders has to be the odd man out at this point. But
yeah, he's fourth on the depth chart right now, if anyone's curious.
I don't love what the Panthers necessarily did in the wide receiver room. I get the Deontay Johnson trade. I think it was a good one to make. But at the same time, I don't know if Leggett being your wide receiver 3 or 2 with Adam Thielen, I just don't love what they did for Bryce Young this offseason outside of securing the interior. I think they should have went and got a guy like a T. Higgins or even a fucking Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, no. So I'm going to touch on everything you just said a little bit more in a sec. I just have to, it's funny. We got to do our victory lap. Every time you remind me, it's only right. I mean, oh, I'm an idiot. Miles Sanders is going to be fantastic in this offense. What are you talking about? They overspent. I'm going to tell you all a little something. Come here. Spending money on running backs is a thing of the past. If the Chiefs and the Patriots didn't teach anybody anything, guys, I don't know what to tell you guys. Spending big money on running backs, it's a thing of the past. I give teams like the Eagles the pass where you already have everything else built and you're taking a shot. Those are the one examples of teams that get those where I'm going to give you that pass. Spending that money on Miles Sanders was not the play. But back on topic of this season, because that was something we addressed last season that already has come to fruition. I think when we look at the Panthers, it's kind of like, just like you're saying, I think they have a very good chance to raise the floor a lot from what they were last year. But realistically, they have an incredibly minimal shot to make the playoffs. And I think I would still picture them as like a 6-7 win team. But again, really, what more could you ask for if you're a Panthers fan? I mean, I think, in my opinion, they actually had a very, very productive offseason. You added a lot of defenders that are actually going to be immediate impact, potential long-term starters for you guys. On the offensive side, you addressed the most important part of the O-line from what wasn't addressed before. You really started filling it out for Bryce. You're not, no more excuses at this point in terms of how he plays behind the O-line. That O-line should be able to keep him clean most of the time. It's now on this receiving core. But at the same time, when you had Deontay Johnson and Xavier Legette the same season, right, the expectations are rising for Bryce. We need to see Bryce make a jump next year. I know this receiving core is nothing fantastic, but Johnson, Thielen, and Legette is definitely a solid little three for you, especially, in the fact that the Panthers, I do believe, are probably going to try to run the ball a lot more this year, try to get Jonathan Brooks incorporated. It'll be very probably a balanced attack. I mean, yeah, I was on the, maybe the side of this where not a lot of people are big fans of it. I think adding DJ Wanham is actually going to be kind of a sneaky good addition for them. I think he can play in this defense really well, produce for them. And Derek Brown has really, really come into his own this last season, really became one of the best defenders in the entire league. If Derek Brown can make another big leap this year or even just stay at that same standard he was at last year, all of a sudden, Panthers floor raises to like 6, 7 wins. And again, if you're a Panthers fan, really, I think all you can ask for.
So I'll say this. I still think their ceiling is like 6, 7 wins. And I'll say this as well. Jonathan Brooks is probably going to help Bryce Young more than Xavier Legette is this year. I think leaning on the run game to take all the pressure off Bryce, because that run game last year was atrocious. Atrocious. So giving Jonathan Brooks, a guy who we know when healthy can be dominant, to a guy like Bryce Young who had all the pressure on him last year, I think is going to have more of an impact this year than Legette does. Obviously, if you look at Legette's numbers in college, last year was his first year with more than 18 receptions in a year. So definitely still raw and has a lot to learn.
No, yeah, Jay Brooks can really truly be kind of like, I'm sure you agree with this. He's kind of like, if he can stay healthy, he really is like an Aaron Jones 2.0 very much type of mold, which is perfect for exactly what Bryce needs. That security blanket in the backfield, who also is a very good runner when you put the ball in his hands.
All right, moving into the New Orleans Saints, we have them with a B. Obviously, they didn't have a ton of money to play around with in the free agency class, but they did have a good draft class. Dobbs, how are you feeling about the upcoming season?
So again, I think the draft class really just carried the grade more than anything. Because again, like you said, they had their hands tied. It's not really much they could do. Here's what I will say though, because it kind of went under the radar and unnoticed. But Saints fans I know noticed, and Niners fans are going to notice soon when he's making a lot of plays for their team. I was really not a fan of letting Isaac Yiadom go for how cheap that he got re-signed for on the Niners. Like, look, when we had injuries last year and he had to come step in and play that slot role or play that outside role, he was genuinely a top 20 corner in the league at all times from a grading standpoint, from a metric standpoint. Isaac Yiadom was fantastic last year. So we let him go for basically a bag of peanuts to the Super Bowl contenders out of the NFC last year. That one really hurt. And I know Saints fans will be able to relate to what I'm saying because that's one that I'm really still not over. But look, on the side of that, I really think I appreciate. Very happy with letting go of Marcus May. Yeah, we tried it. It didn't work. Jordan Howden played really good for a rookie. Seeing Jordan Howden come in and take that role, letting us trust the young guys for once, actually give the young guys a shot. I'm all for that. Let's keep doing that. Our linebacker core worries me because DeMario is as amazing as he is. He's getting not very old, but he's getting on the much older side of things. And we know how things are in the NFL, right? Like 1 year you can go from being one of the best players at your position to just falling off of age. I worry about that with DeMario. And then outside of that, Pete Werner and then Willie Gay, unless Willie Gay can make a big jump or Pete Werner can get back to his old rookie sophomore year form, we're in for a rough time here with the linebacking core. But on the interior, I like the additions we made in the draft. I'm trying to remember, I'm blanking on his name, but the guy we added from Northern Iowa, I think is going to actually make a really big jump.
Christian Boyd.
To this D-line. Actually, yeah, Christian Boyd's going to be able to help us out a lot. I do really believe. Paulson Adebo, I think, is going to make another big jump this year. Kool-Aid McKinstry, I don't know where we're going to end up playing him, but I like the corner. I like the DB room for sure. As far as the O-line goes, especially after losing Andrews Pete. Definitely more questions than answers. But at least with Fuaga in here, I'm very confident that we're starting to actually focus on it again. We're going to start addressing it again. The reality is this. Unless Derek Carr really turns it around like how he did at the end of the year last year, the Saints will probably have a similar year to what they did last year. But I will say, I do hold some optimism with the new offensive coordinator coming, Clint Kubiak, that he really could elevate this team to a point where we're actually kind of surprised and we can't even believe as Saints fans the productivity we're watching on offense. Best case scenario for us, but I stay optimistic, but I also stay realistic. We could very much witness a season very similar to last year. This offseason is going to have to tell its story during the season because I still don't know how to feel about everything altogether.
You guys probably have the funniest cornerback or quarterback room in the NFL. Derek Carr, Kellen Mond, Nathan Peterman, and Spencer Rattler. Is Spencer Rattler like a realistic option for QB of the future?
I'll say this. You know what? If we find a way to make it work, he has skill set that I really do love. It's just about getting him to the point where we get rid of all the kinks in his game. But I'm all in for right now.
All right. Chase Young and Equanimous St. Brown also additions to the team. I think I would have liked the Saints to make another addition at the pass catcher because I know you have A.T. Perry and Rashid Shaheed, but you're kind of still leaving Olave out on the island there, which is tough.
No, and again, the way I see it is like, I think Olave at his best will always be if we can just get him primarily in the slot where we have that outside guy for him. Hopefully that can end up being, like we're saying, a Shaheed and A.T. Perry combo. That would be ideal to me with keeping Chris in the slot. But again, as far as things go right now, I really don't know how to feel. If Kendre Miller can make a big jump this year too, I mean, look, this offense has a lot of low-key sleepers. I will say as a Saints fan, we do. Rashid, he still doesn't have the respect he deserves. We have guys. It's just a matter of getting them in the right position. And it's more than anything a matter of Derek Carr needs to make a leap this year, or we are going to have very immediate questions to answer next year. And there's just no two ways about it. Every Saints fan, everybody across the league can agree with that.
Moving into the last team of the NFC South, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with a B. So everyone got a B except the Falcons got a B- here. So, we talked about this with when we did our Buccaneers interview. We like what the Buccaneers already have, and they're one of those franchises similar to the Colts where they like to re-sign their own guys. They brought in Bryce Hall, Jordan Whitehead. They, tagged Antoine Winfield, which I think was a great addition. I think getting Baker Mayfield for the money that they got him for was really good. And then they addressed the interior offensive line in the draft. They got Chris Braswell. They need to kind of, replenish that defensive line. Tyke Smith as a safety, not bad. I don't love him. I really do like the addition of Bucky Irving to kind of give, a little bit of a different pace to a Rashad White. And then adding a guy like a Jalen McMillan to their wide receiver room, just give him a little bit more versatility, which is actually, with Godwin, Evans, McMillan, and Trey Palmer, I do really like what they have going for them there.
No, I was going to say, like, to echo that, especially knowing that I saw it was announced recently that Chris Godwin's going back to the slot full time. I think if you're the Bucs, you can say, and then Trey Palmer just burning dudes down the seam on the outside, or down the sideline on the outside, I should say, on go balls. Yeah, all of a sudden, and then Jalen McMillan too, like we're saying. I mean, Jalen McMillan, I think, can come in and he could really take that wide receiver 3 spot quicker than a lot of people think. No disrespect to Trey Palmer. Trey Palmer might just be a little bit more of a gadget in this offense than Jalen McMillan could be at his ceiling. You know what I mean? I will say though, as we were talking about too, when we did our Bucs interview, this interior O line minus Graham Barton, because I'm very confident that Graham Barton is going to translate to being a good pro. But outside of him, the guard situation right now is real rough if neither of these guys make a jump. And as we said, they're young. We can see O-line making huge jumps that rookie to sophomore year. But it's not like it's often. And if they don't make that jump, that interior is going to be shaky. I mean, it's just the bottom line. And for the amount of money you sign Baker to, right, we know Baker's susceptible to getting hurt. Like, I think I would have wanted to see them invest a little bit more in the interior whether it was through the draft or through free agency. But I get it. You also be saying, well, then a lot of the draft capital recently on this interior was just wasted, and we don't want to just give up on these guys yet. I get that as well. I definitely get that as well. Um, I think more than anything, I worry about the DB depth, with the Bucks. But I get it that they're just taking their shots on young guys right now more than anything, which is literally that's exactly what they're doing. But just like they're doing with the interior O line, if that ends up not working out, and you're already a year into Baker's contract, all of a sudden we're getting into a sticky situation. There's depth, and like we say, you kept Todd Bowles, and Todd Bowles, there's a real good chance it's not that guy for them long term. So there's a lot of questions to be answered.
You kind of got to ride it out with Baker and Bowles. Like once Baker leaves, Bowles is gone too, or once Bowles is gone, Baker's gone. Because it's just, in my opinion, what's the point of getting rid of one and keeping the other? Because Baker probably won't be your long-term guy. Just strictly off the fact of not saying Baker can't be a long-term franchise guy. It's more of the fact of the Bucs offense is a little bit old in terms of the wide receiver position. Like once Mike Evans goes, I think there's just kind of like a bigger drop off than people will expect. So it's almost like we know the Bucs don't hit the reset button, but they might have to.
No, absolutely. That's the biggest thing is, as far as building the regime around Baker, that's why I was a little bit more loose, because if that I'm only grading based off what clearly the vision is, right? Like that for that being the vision, I gave a fair enough grade. But again, the reality is things could come crumbling down very quickly with the way that they've built this roster as of right now.
Moving into the AFC West, we have the Denver Broncos with a C+. So the Broncos were very limited in their resources in free agency and draft capital. So it's kind of hard to grade them. I like the trade for Zach Wilson. He's a project. You're getting Bo Nix in the draft, so you acquire 2 new quarterbacks. What a fucking funny quarterback room. Bo Nix, Zach Wilson, and Jared Stidham.
Don't forget Ben DiNucci.
Oh, Ben DiNucci. Their quarterback room is very funny. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I love their free agent additions. They were all just kind of like, I don't know. Like, there's nobody jumping off the page. You got Lil Jordan Humphrey, who is, I believe, with Sean Payton down in New Orleans. I'm waiting for
Nola legend.
Right. I'm waiting for the Taysom Hill trade. And then, I did like the Audric Estime, Jonah Ellis, and Troy Franklin draft picks. I think pairing Bo Nix with Troy Franklin, because I'm assuming Nix is just going to be the starter day one. I love, regardless of the skill of the player, I love adding a college receiver to a college quarterback in the NFL. I just think the chemistry helps them so much. And Bears, I would not be, surprised if they add a Taj Washington or a Brendan Rice if they get cut. But at the end of the day, that is all to say that, this is a big jump for a lot of these guys, and a big jump for all of them, actually. Having some type of similarity to what they had in college would be a big help. And I think Troy Franklin falling to the 4th was kind of crazy. I think people had him in the 2nd or 3rd. I think maybe his weight kind of scared him. But overall, I am optimistic for what the Broncos can do this year. I think they may have a similar record, but they will be a better team.
No, I agree. And again, let me preface with the fact that I think that Bo Nix is actually going to be so much better in this offense than a lot of people think. Like, I think he can really produce in this offense. But that's the thing. It's actually not about Bo Nix. It's about the fact that, like you said, you really touched on everything. This team has done nothing to move the needle to be a true competitor, especially in their division that they're in. And again, let me be clear. This is not Sean Payton's fault at all. Sean Payton truly walked into a really effed up situation. I'm sure thinking he'd be able to fix the kinks in Russ's game, only to realize that him and Russ were going to just bash heads forever because they're very much not the same type of people, and it just was never going to work. All of a sudden now he's in a full-blown rebuild situation, and I know that's not what he signed up for, but they're navigating it the best they can, right? I think the thing that we have to acknowledge more than anything, though, is it's like just you have guys like Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin, but Cortland Sutton doesn't stay healthy. Josh Reynolds isn't moving the needle. as far as defense goes, you've wasted a lot of high round draft picks over the last couple of years on guys that just haven't panned out, that have not even starters this upcoming year. The edge rushers are just not moving the needle at all. The cornerback room minus Pat Surtain is like genuinely tragic. The safety room is not good. Like it's like, if we're being realistic, where are the Broncos going to go from here? Like, I guess this is the thing. What do you do if you're the Broncos? Like, you have the right coach, but the optics are going to say, because we know how the NFL operates, I don't think they're going to be able to turn around and win enough games where, so you know how NFL fans work. They just think of wins, loss. They don't think of circumstance. I'm not trying, this is a lot of NFL fans, casual fans. They don't think of circumstance, roster, management, the situation the coach walked into. You can see it, bro. The writing's on the wall. A year or two down the road, the Broncos, fans are going to be, the casuals are going to be, fire Sean Payton, only to fall into, I'm going down a year's prediction here. But I just feel like the trajectory I'm seeing from the Broncos right now scares me, because I just don't think that they're going to give Sean Payton enough time that he needs to really turn around this disaster of a current roster. But it's not his fault. So if you're a Broncos fan, I guess, let me know in the comments what you guys think the Broncos need to do, because I think that there is so much that needs to be done. And it's like, you don't have the resources to do it. So where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those. I think it's going to take a while, and I feel no rush for Sean Payton. I think if you're going to pay him what you're paying him, you got to know that, like, this is a teardown. Like, this is a teardown, reformation, rebuild, like whatever you want to call it. Like, this is the start. And when you don't have early draft picks, like, yes, you have the first that you had at 12 and you get the last quarterback on the board, like, it's going to take some time. But yeah, going into our next team in the AFC West, we have the Kansas City Chiefs with an A. I think the reason it's so easy to kind of grade the Chiefs is because they did kind of exactly what they needed to do. They re-signed Chris Jones. They gave Kelsey an extension. They signed Marquise Brown. Rashee Rice is an idiot, so they drafted Xavier Worthy. I think they probably were going to draft a receiver anyway. But getting Kingsley Suamataia, Jared Wiley, Jaden Hicks, like, they had a good free agent class, and they had a great draft class, in my opinion. Jaden Hicks was one of my favorite safeties in the draft, and going to a team like the Chiefs is awesome because I just loved watching him play. And hopefully Wiley can learn a thing or two from Kelsey as he kind of gets a little bit older there.
No, absolutely. So the first thing I want to touch on just before it slips my ADD brain is what you were saying about Jaden Hicks. I think, number one, what I love so much about the Jaden Hicks pick is that we know, if I'm not mistaken, I'm sure I'm right on this though, Justin Reed only has another year on his deal. So you're already forward thinking, like, yeah, Justin Reed's probably going to want more than we're going to be willing to pay. And we're going to have his replacement sitting right here, learning the scheme a year in advance. Absolute Moneyball play. You got to love that if you're a Chiefs fan. And I think, if anything, that's what you can say the Chiefs have done so beautifully over the last few years, and they keep doing it. Leo Chenal is another great example. You just lost Willie Gay, only to replace him with a guy who already was playing better ball when he was getting those reps last year, already one of the higher graded interior linebackers in the entire league. And you spent, what, a third rounder on him 2 or 3 years ago? This has been the Chiefs' recipe over the last few years, and it's working to perfection. They're always thinking ahead. They're always using their draft picks on guys that they will be able to viably start in the future. And if you're a Chiefs fan, you have got to just so much appreciate the vision that this team has laid out every single year that they execute on. I mean, it's always forward thinking. I think that they really learned with that Clyde Edwards-Helaire pick that you really want to, you really want to use these picks on positions that are going to be A, premium positions, and B, positions where it's volatile with injuries and everything else. And I think they have just really turned around the draft strategy. And even when they picked Clyde, it worked just fine. So, it doesn't really matter. But the point is, this team, I mean, they've come together so well. Kingsley Suamataia is very likely going to take Jawan Taylor's spot sometime soon, the way I see it personally.
I could even see him taking over Wanya Morris.
I could either way. If Jawan Taylor plays how he did again last year, I think it'll be Jawan's spot, but I also can very much see it being Wanya. And then maybe even kick Wanya over. I don't know. There's a lot of ways they could go about it. But the bottom line is you got the guy that you wanted at pick 32, at pick 64. I mean, that in and of itself is already means to give you an A in the offseason. When you took Xavier Worthy, I mean, there's just so much we could say. The bottom line is when you're the Super Bowl champ and you make as many forward-thinking moves as the Chiefs did, you would just be hard-pressed for us not to give you an A.
Yeah, I mean, there's really not much to say. I mean, if the Rashee Rice, deal kind of works out where it's like he's not in that big of trouble. I mean, he just smacked someone in Dallas, so not going great for him. Didn't really follow the lie low orders that well. But, I mean, a receiving room of Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown, and Travis Kelce, it's kind of disgusting.
Yeah. No,
three-peat
the re-sign for Travis, I mean, it's disgusting.
Moving in to the Las Vegas Raiders, who had an interesting offseason. I think they had some wild cards. We gave them a B. Signing Christian Wilkins was crazy, and then also drafting Brock Bowers. I think those were two very unexpected things. And I'm not going to lie, though. I do like what Tom Telesco was doing here with the Raiders.
No, surprisingly enough, because again, I always admit when they signed Telesco, there was a lot of shit talk for me, a lot of banter, a lot of running jokes. But look, he started off this tenure very impressively. I think attacking it exactly how you want to attack it, especially kind of like we were just talking about. I'm blanking on what team. Oh, the Steelers. Like we were talking about with the Steelers earlier. Like sometimes if you're not really sure about the QB situation and you don't want to reach on it and overspend capital, the Steelers learned that one a couple years ago with Kenny Pickett, right? They laid the blueprint out of why you don't do that. And especially when you don't have the line already together. I think the Raiders kind of looked at it like, yeah, we could really reach, maybe even trade up and waste assets. Or we can really just build these trenches on both sides, have both of the most important groups of both sides of the ball really starting to come together so that when we get our guy at quarterback, we have the two most important position groups filled and we're actually ready to hit the ground running and actually give him a chance to compete in a Super Bowl window. And again, just like we were saying the other day, look, could Aiden O'Connell actually be the guy for them? I can't say for sure no yet. I mean, he could make a humongous jump this year, and then all of a sudden, the Raiders are in a position where you're saying to yourself, I don't think they're competing for the Lombardi, but they're competing in that division at the least. And again, I don't think that's likely, but it's a great, what am I looking for here? It's a great best case scenario to have when the reality of the situation is that your floor is that you're really putting together two very impressive trench groups.
Well, I also think, AP is going to raise the floor of this team regardless with him just being the coach. And like you were saying with a Super Bowl window, I think the Raiders know it's probably not time to compete now. I do think they were definitely players for Penix if he was on the board at 13, I think they would have taken him. But also kind of looking at the Raiders, maybe try to compete in like 2-3 years. And that's going to, suck because hopefully the Chargers and Broncos are back on track at that point. And oh my God, wait, hold on. I just thought about this. They're in a division with Jim Harbaugh, Andy Reid, and Sean Payton. They could not oh my Lord. Yeah, so I don't know. Just to kind of echo what you said.
They need an AP masterclass.
I think this team is good, but it's going to be very hard to compete without an elite quarterback, especially when Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert play in your division. So very interested to see what the Raiders put out on tape, especially after losing Josh Jacobs. We'll see what Zamir White has going into the year. But overall, I think like we were talking about yesterday with Marcus is they did kind of build that depth on the offensive line, and that's something that I think, can never be overlooked. Cody Whitehair is not a scrub, and neither is Pete. They're both good offensive linemen, especially for depth pieces. So, moving into our final team of the AFC West, we have the Los Angeles Chargers with a B. They let go of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, and their signings of J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, DJ Shark, and Hayden Hurst were kind of unmoving, but I did actually really, really like their draft class. I think, Joe Alt and Ladd McConkey being their first two picks really set this team up well. And you know what the Chargers are going to do. They want to run the ball. This is going to take a couple years, but once Harbaugh gets his team going, I feel like the Chargers can be a dominant team for a long time, especially with the quarterback already in place.
No, for sure. Again, they realistically, and I think Chargers fans would agree, they definitely still have a very fair amount of work to be done on that interior of the O-line. But it doesn't have to be done this year necessarily. I think that is going to be, I'll give you a heavy prediction. I think we're going to see them taking a heavy dose of interior O-line at some point in the draft next year, whether it's early, whether it's late. I think that we're going to see them take an interior early. That early prediction on the next year's draft for the Chargers. But outside of that, the receiving core is definitely starting to come together. If Quentin Johnston can make a big jump this year, that him and Ladd, it's a very nice complement, duo. Like they complement each other's skill sets. Yeah, and let's say with Josh too, like Josh Palmer, these guys all do very much have a very nice complement off of each other. I think as far as the defense goes, if we're being objective, Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack are getting older, and on top of that, Joey Bosa is just injury prone as anything. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but Joey Bosa is incredibly injury prone. And Khalil Mack, as impressive as he just played last year, you have to always ask yourself when he's getting up there in age, how much he's going to have left in the tank. That's always going to be in the back of your mind. Derwin James hasn't come back from the injuries, the same as he was before. He's still a productive safety, but he's not the old Derwin. Call it for what it is. I mean, he especially last year, not old Derwin. Alohi Gilman actually was a much better safety last year. So, but that's the thing, is if we're at a point now where the two best players on this Chargers defense are Alohi Gilman and a very, very aging Khalil Mack, and Joey Bosa when he's out there 1 out of every 6 games. You know what I mean? There's a lot of work that needs to be done on this defense. A lot. So I think the bottom line is that the Chargers, kind of like we could say about the Broncos, but the Broncos are certainly much farther along the way because they don't have a proven guy like Justin Herbert. But if Justin Herbert was in the Chargers building, I think you could very much compare the situations very, very, very close of the Chargers and Broncos right now.
If Justin Herbert wasn't in the Chargers building, J.J. McCarthy would be a Charger right now. I believe.
Oh, yeah. There's zero doubt.
No, I mean, the Chargers are definitely going to be one of my favorite teams to watch just because I really do like Harbaugh, and I think the way he plays football is, well, doesn't play football, coaches football, is very interesting because it's not whatever. He's trying to run the ball down your throat, and that's what Greg Roman as the OC is going to do. Moving into our final division of the NFC West, we have the Arizona Cardinals with a B+. I did really like their draft class. I just didn't really like their free agency. I think what they did is they, got Sean Murphy-Bunting. They raised the floor of the roster, and they kind of were trying to add the talent through the draft. So it is a complimentary class for draft and free agency. And getting Marvin Harrison Jr., Trey Benson, Max Melton, Darius Robinson, Isaiah Adams, Tip, Ryman, you can go down the list. All of these players are good players and can contribute for them immediately. Even getting Christian Jones was a good pick. So I think the Cardinals are setting themselves up. Obviously, they are a ways away, but I would not be surprised if they're a little bit better than people expect next year.
No, see, I think that's completely fair because, again, Kyler gets his fair amount of disrespect, but we've seen there are games where Kyler will kind of just go out there and do his thing and almost will the team to victory, especially with Marv by his side now. I mean, this team, they're no scrub. Trey McBride, he's not become a household name yet, but he will soon. Trey McBride is a really talented guy out there. I mean, this offensive group, Michael Wilson makes another jump. All of a sudden the Cardinals and James Conner and Trey Benson, who I think could come take that starting job much sooner than a lot of people think. As talented as James Conner is and as good of ball as he played last year, it's a good problem to have if you're the Cardinals because you got a fantastic running back room. Again, though, much like I just said about the Chargers, you could apply this to both sides of the ball. Apply this to the defense and offense. I think we're going to get a very heavy dose of investment into the interior next year for how they're going to have to build this team going forward. But on the 1 year that they had this year of making adjustments and changes, I think you say you added Mac Wilson. I like that move a lot. Max Melton is going to be your new corner one. You desperately need a corner. Love Max Melton. Like, they made a lot of moves that are going to immediately impact the team this year, but it's not enough to move the needle where they're going to be a threat or anything. But it's certainly, I think we could agree, was a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think Monty had another good draft, and that's something that is so promising, I think, for the Cardinals is regardless about how you feel about Gannon, you know that you have a very good GM in there who knows how to wheel and deal and start to put together a team and knows what value is when looking at a player. Moving into our next team, we have the Los Angeles Rams with an A-. So they got Kevin Dotson re-signed. They signed Jonah Jackson. So they really did secure that interior of the offensive line. They got Tre'Davious White. They got Cam Curl. They got Darius Williams. So they solidified their secondary. They also got Jared Verse and Braden Fisk and Brennan Jackson later on. So they secured, I don't want to say secured, but definitely upgraded their defensive line. I think they kind of had to after losing Aaron Donald. Then you get Bo Limmer, a center later, Tyler Davis. So they went heavy on defensive line. They got Cam Kitchens. I'm a big Cam Kitchens guy. I think going to the Rams, I had him mocked there a couple times in my mock draft madness. Cam Kitchens and Cam Curl, the Cam squared, is going to do some damage in LA. But I think it's cool adding Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, especially because they both played at FSU.
No, yeah, I think we would agree. For what the capital they had, for the expectations we had for them, it's very safe to say the Rams went in and had an absolute home run of an offseason, especially considering you don't really know how much is left in the tank for Stafford. I'll tell you this. They're giving him every chance possible, and they're doing everything they need to do to try to give him another Super Bowl window, right? And that's if you're the Rams, if you're Stafford, that's really all you can say that you would ask for. I meant to say if you're a Rams fan, right? Like, they're going all in, but here's the thing. I want to say on top of that it's not only that, they're also making all the right moves that even if this window doesn't end up being the window and you got to move on and you have to figure out the QB situation again soon, you're in a position where you have so many productive young guys that this team is adding where they're not going to have to pay that contract immediately. Like, you're going to have at least three, for most, 2 at least more years after this before you have to even really sign any big up-and-coming contracts. You added Tre'Davious White, who everyone kind of forgot about. But if Tre'Davious White can come back and be healthy, I mean, man, oh man, bro, this team is really, really actually a team that's able to compete with almost anyone. I mean, call it for what it is, right? Like, if Staff can come back healthy, this team is competitive.
And I think that's what we love about the Rams so much is they have been building for the future, but they also have kept themselves competitive enough where it's like, if you get the right team going, you guys get hot at the right time, you can win another ring. Like, Stafford still has it. I am kind of concerned about their future at quarterback. I do think getting Sam Howell would have been amazing for them. But overall, the Rams are still a scary team. I mean, hitting on Puka was nuts. So overall, I think the Rams are set up in good position to excel in 2024. San Francisco 49ers, we have them with an A-. I like Leonard Floyd. I like Gross Matos, Malik Collins. They did a lot in free agency to the defense. Didn't really touch the offense that much outside of extending Colton McKivitz. And, Ricky Pearsall in the first. We've been on the Slick Rick train for quite a while. I think a lot of people thought it was a reach. I do not. I think he is a great addition for Brock Purdy and the San Francisco 49ers. I do like Renardo Green. I like Dominic Pooney. I mean, they probably had one of my favorite draft classes, as much as it fucking pains me to say it because I am just a 49ers generational hater. But I can't look at this class and be upset. Like they killed it. They knocked it out of the park.
No, knocked it out of the park. And you could compare them very much to what we just said about the Rams. Probably even to a higher extent, knowing that they just came off of a Super Bowl berth. But the concept is the same. Where you're building for the future in areas where you're considering guys that you might have to let go of soon, right? I.e., Ayuk, Debo, and you're thinking about the future with, again, because everyone forgets, but my guy, Jacob Cowing, Brandon Cooks, little 2.0, if he can hit his ceiling. Yeah, you had him and Pearsall in this same class. Those are two just sneaky. Well, Ricky's not sneaky anymore like we thought he was going to be, but those are two guys that can come in and really produce for you. They keep using the draft picks on guys that they're going to have to use that they're going to need to fill in the future, because you already have a good cornerback room now, but you never know, right? When re-signs happen, it's going to come time to make some decisions. Now you already have a guy like Renardo Green in the building on a cheap contract. Like, the Niners are doing exactly what the Rams were just like we were just saying, building for the future, but also staying incredibly competitive in the moment. I think one thing we'd agree on that we'd say 1,000%. I would have definitely liked, and I don't understand why they didn't address the interior, whether it was the center or the left guard at some point, whether it was free agency or the draft. That to me is pretty surprising. And I think we could agree is really the only reason that they don't stand at an A or an A plus, because they did fail to address the area that killed them the most in the Super Bowl.
I will say this. They do have Pooney on the NFL draft site marked as a guard. And on the depth chart, they also have him as a guard, which didn't he play tackle in college? Or am I tripping?
Yeah, but I thought he was going to be one of those guys that was going to switch over to guard, so it makes sense.
They also did take Jared Kingston out of USC, who was a guard. So they took a couple swings on guys, just not a lot of like high capital on these guys.
I thought it would be high cap. And again, if they spent a higher pick on a guy like a Christian Haynes or something, this is an AA plus offseason to me. That's the only thing that holds them back.
Moving on to our last team, 32 out of 32. We have the Seattle Seahawks with a B plus. So I do like the Laken Tomlinson signing. They kind of let a lot of people go in free agency, but I think that they had such a good draft class that it kind of outweighs what their grade is for free agency. I mean, getting Byron Murphy at pick 16, getting Sam Howell in that trade with the Commanders, I really liked. I think it's going to be exciting to see him. I don't know if Geno is going to be the starter all year this year. Christian Haynes to solidify that interior. You get Nehemiah Pritchett to help in the cornerback room, even though you don't really need it. And they get DJ James, who I think is a really good underrated corner. AJ Barner is a tight end. I think they did a really good job drafting. I just am interested to see kind of what their free agency approach is next year, because I think with kind of the new head coach, and I know John Schneider is the GM there, but we know Pete Carroll was making a lot of picks. So I want to know what Schneider's draft class looks like after a year of kind of looking and evaluating the roster for what it is.
No, that's a great point. And, more than anything, I think, I'm with you 1,000%. Like, the draft class carries them because they didn't do a ton that I loved in free agency, but they also, here's what I will say. They got the steal to me of free agency in Tyrell Dodson, where one of those guys where a lot of people probably don't know who Tyrell Dodson is right now. They're scratching their head a little bit. But, from the Bills last year, highest graded linebacker in the entire league. Again, on a fair number of snaps. I think he only was out there about 580, 600 snaps, something around those lines. But when he was out there, man, oh man, was he playing fantastic football. And if he can come take that same level of ball he was playing in Buffalo and bring that over to the Seahawks defense and take that Bobby Wagner role and just dominate in it, I mean, that will be the steal that we look back on to this free agency class. So I think very potentially the Seahawks did get that guy and again, this defense is really coming together. So if you could get, nobody's going to be Bobby Wagner 2.0, but you get my point. If you can get your Bobby replacement and now really you're running this defense kind of like an older style Seahawks defense, just locked down secondary, linebackers that really can make things happen in Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dodson. The edge rushers, like I say, very underrated group of in Boye Mafe and Uchenna Nwosu. Safety core a little bit, I don't know how to feel about like it's not that it's a bad core, but Julian Love, Rayshon Jenkins doesn't really it's not the greatest safety duo in the world. But for the way the Seahawks play and they're how shell oriented that they are, you know what? It certainly is going to get the job done. And I think what you can say is more than anything, the Seahawks can compete in the NFC. Again, I don't know how far they can go, but this is a roster that can compete.
Well, thank you guys so much for watching. This has been off-season grades for every single NFL team. If you don't know ball and want to know ball, be sure to subscribe, leave a like, let us know in the comments your highest grade for a team this year and your lowest grade for a team this year. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you have a great rest of your night.